Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The call came through at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday night in October 2018. I was already in bed, scrolling through my phone with the TV playing some rerun in the background, when I saw my sister Chloe's name light up the screen. She was driving from Anchorage to Fairbanks for a job interview at some environmental consulting firm. A 7-hour drive she'd insisted on doing alone despite my protests. "Hey, just wanted to let you know I'm taking a quick break," she said, and I could hear the exhaustion creeping into her voice. She'd been on the road for about 4 hours at that point, somewhere past Cantwell on the Parks Highway. The connection kept cutting in and out, but I could make out the sound of her car's hazard lights clicking in the background. She told me she'd found a pullout area with a decent view of Denali, even though it was too dark to actually see the mountain. I remember asking her if she felt safe stopping there alone, especially that late at night. The Parks Highway gets pretty desolate once you pass the small towns. Just endless stretches of wilderness, no cell towers, no streetlights, nothing but darkness and the occasional trucker passing through. Chloe just laughed it off the way she always did when I worried too much. "There's literally nobody here, Jess. I haven't seen another car in like 20 minutes, she said. I could hear her car door open, the little ding-ding-ding warning sound it made when the keys were still in the ignition. She said she just needed to stretch her legs for 5 minutes, grab some water from the cooler in her back seat, maybe eat one of those protein bars she'd packed. The last thing she said to me was that she'd text me when she got back on the road, and then again when she reached Fairbanks. I told her to be careful. She said, 'Always am,' and then the call dropped. I figured it was just the spotty coverage out there. I went back to my show, but I kept checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for that text saying she was back on the road. 15 minutes passed, then 30. I sent her a quick, 'You good?' message, but it showed as undelivered. That wasn't unusual. The cell service along that highway is basically non-existent for huge stretches. Still, this nagging worry started building in my chest. Chloe was always good about checking in, especially when she knew I was anxious about her traveling alone. By 1 a.m., I'd called her phone 6 times. Each call went straight to voicemail, not even ringing first. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she decided to take a longer break. Maybe she even decided to nap for a bit. But Chloe had a car charger. She never let her phone die, and she definitely wouldn't nap at some random pullout in the middle of nowhere. She was too smart for that, too cautious despite her bravado. At 2 a.m., I called the Alaska State Troopers. The dispatcher was professional but clearly thought I was overreacting. "Ma'am, it's only been a couple of hours since you last heard from her," she said in that practiced, patient tone they probably use for worried relatives all the time. But when I explained the exact situation, that Chloe had pulled over on the Parks Highway around mile marker 185, that she was alone, that her phone was going straight to voicemail, the dispatcher's tone shifted slightly. She took down Chloe's information, her full name, the make and model of her car, a silver 2016 Subaru Outback, her license plate number, what she was wearing when she left, jeans, hiking boots, and her favorite green Columbia jacket. The dispatcher said they'd send a trooper to check that stretch of highway on their next patrol, which would be around sunrise. I spent the rest of the night on my couch, phone in hand, watching the clock and jumping at every notification that wasn't from Chloe. The call from the troopers came at 7:23 a.m. I answered before the first ring finished. The officer identified himself as Trooper Daniels, and something in his voice made my whole body go rigid. He said they'd located Chloe's vehicle at a pullout area near mile marker 186, exactly where she'd described. The car was just sitting there, driver's door wide open, hazard lights still blinking weakly as the battery drained. Her purse was on the passenger seat with her wallet inside, untouched. Her phone was on the floor by the gas pedal, screen cracked like it had been dropped. The keys were still in the ignition, and when the trooper turned them, the engine started right up. She had over half a tank of gas. But here's what made no sense. The engine block was still warm when they found it at 7 a.m., as if the car had been running until very recently. That meant either Chloe had been there just minutes before the trooper arrived, or someone else had been running that engine through the night. Trooper Daniels kept asking me questions while his partner searched the area. Had Chloe been depressed? Was she having problems with anyone? Did she mention meeting someone? I wanted to scream at him that none of that mattered because Chloe would never just walk away from her car like that. She wouldn't leave her purse, she wouldn't leave her phone, and she definitely wouldn't leave the door hanging open with the keys in the ignition. The trooper said they were checking the immediate vicinity. There was forest on one side of the pullout and a steep slope down to a creek on the other. He promised they'd have a search team and dogs out there within the hour. I told him I was getting in my car right now, that I'd be there in 4 hours. He tried to discourage me, said I should wait by my phone in case Chloe called, but I was already grabbing my keys. Before we hung up, he asked me what Chloe had been wearing again. When I told him about the green Columbia jacket, there was a pause. "We found a jacket in the car," he said carefully. "Green Columbia. It was folded neatly on the back seat." The drive to that pullout was the longest 4 hours of my life. I called everyone. Our parents in Florida, Chloe's roommate back in Anchorage, her ex-boyfriend Nathan, who she'd remained friends with, even her boss at the outdoor gear store where she worked part-time. Nobody had heard from her since yesterday afternoon. Nathan mentioned something that made my chest tighten. Chloe had called him around 9 p.m., a couple hours before she called me, and she'd seemed weird. Not upset exactly, but distracted. She'd asked him a strange question. Did he remember that time they'd gone camping near Denali and heard those voices in the woods at night? When he said yeah, those were probably just other campers, she'd gone quiet and then changed the subject. He didn't think much of it at the time, but now it seemed significant. By the time I reached mile marker 186, there were 3 trooper vehicles, a search and rescue van, and 2 civilian pickup trucks that belonged to volunteer searchers from Cantwell. The pullout was exactly as Chloe had described, a wide gravel area carved into the side of the highway, big enough for maybe 4 or 5 cars. Her Subaru was still there, now surrounded by orange traffic cones. I parked and immediately ran to the car, but a trooper stopped me before I could touch anything. They were treating it as a potential crime scene. From where I stood, I could see inside, her traveling coffee mug in the cup holder, still half full of what looked like cold coffee. A bag of trail mix spilled across the back floor, her sleeping bag rolled up in the back with her overnight bag. Everything looked so normal, like she'd just stepped away for a second. The search teams were spread out through the woods calling her name. The dogs had picked up her scent leading from the car toward the tree line, but it stopped abruptly about 30 feet in, just stopped, like she'd vanished into thin air. One of the dog handlers, an older guy named Bill, pulled me aside and said something that still haunts me. In 40 years of doing this, I've never seen a scent trail just end like that. Usually it goes up a tree, into water, or to a vehicle. But this, it's like she just ceased to exist at that spot. They searched for 3 days. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the wilderness. Divers checked the creek even though it was only 3 feet deep at its deepest point. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through miles of forest. They brought in special equipment, thermal cameras, ground-penetrating radar, everything. The FBI even got involved because of the strange circumstances. On the second day, they found something that nobody could explain. About a quarter-mile from the pullout, deeper in the woods than anyone thought Chloe could have gone on foot in the dark, they found her hiking boots. They were placed, not dropped, but deliberately placed, side by side on a fallen log, laces still tied. The socks were tucked neatly inside each boot. No footprints led to or from that spot, which made no sense because the ground was soft from recent rain. The forensics team took photos from every angle, measured everything, but couldn't explain how those boots got there without leaving a single track in the mud. Then things got stranger. The forensics team processing Chloe's car found something odd about her phone. Yes, it was cracked, but when they managed to power it on, they discovered that between 11:47 p.m., when she called me, and 2:47 a.m., the phone had taken 73 photographs. All of them were completely black. Not dark like night photos. Completely, uniformly black, even though the flash had fired for each one. The metadata showed they were taken at intervals ranging from 30 seconds to 12 minutes apart. The phone's GPS showed it hadn't moved from that pullout during those 3 hours. The last photo was taken at 2:47 a.m., and then nothing. The battery still had 31% charge when they found it. Her call log showed 17 missed calls from an unknown number between midnight and 2 a.m., all from a number that didn't exist when they tried to trace it. The phone company had no record of those calls in their system, but there they were on Chloe's phone, each one lasting exactly 7 seconds. On the 4th day, the search was called off. The official report lists Chloe as a missing person, case still open but not actively investigated. The troopers' theory was that she had some kind of mental break, wandered into the woods, and succumbed to the elements. They suggested maybe she'd been picked up by someone passing by, even though no vehicles were caught on the highway cameras during that time window. But none of that explains the boots, the photos, the impossible phone calls, or how her scent just stopped. I hired a private investigator who spent 2 months on the case. He found something the police had missed or maybe just didn't want to acknowledge. In the 5 years before Chloe disappeared, there had been 6 other missing persons cases along that exact stretch of the park's highway. Different years, different seasons, but all between mile markers of 180 and 190. All were people traveling alone. All vehicles were found with engines still warm, doors open, personal items undisturbed. None of them were ever found. I still drive that stretch of highway sometimes. I know I shouldn't, but I can't help myself. I park at that same pullout and stand where Chloe's car was found. Last month, almost 6 years after she disappeared, I was there around midnight, the same time she'd called me that night. I was about to leave when my phone rang. Unknown number, my heart nearly stopped. I answered, but there was only silence. Not dead air. I could hear something like wind through trees, but different. Hollower. The call lasted exactly 7 seconds before it disconnected. When I looked at my phone, there was no record of the call in my log. I drove home and haven't been back since. But sometimes, late at night, my phone will light up with a notification that immediately disappears. And I just know, it's Chloe, trying to tell me something about what happened at mile marker 186. I've accepted that I'll never know what that something is. The not knowing is worse than grief. At least with grief, you have an ending. Most people in my town knew my brother Jason as the guy who could navigate any trail blindfolded. He'd been hiking since he was 12, had summited every major peak within a 300-mile radius, and kept a detailed journal of every single trek he'd ever taken. The morning of November 8, 2016, he texted our family group chat a photo of his hiking boots next to his beat-up Ford Ranger, with the message, "Crow pass today, solo run, should be back before dinner." That was the last time any of us heard from him. What happened over the next 48 hours still keeps me awake at night, not because of what we found, but because of what we didn't find, and the single detail that made absolutely no sense to any of the search and rescue teams who combed that mountain. I was sitting in my apartment in Anchorage, grading papers for my 8th grade science class, when Mom called around 9 that evening. Jason hadn't come home, hadn't answered his phone, and Dad had already driven out to the trailhead to check if his truck was still there. It was. The doors were locked, his emergency supplies still in the back, and fresh tire tracks in the gravel showed he'd arrived that morning just like he said he would. Dad said the temperature was dropping fast, already below 20 degrees, and Jason had only packed for a day hike. By the time I made it to my parents' house, Mom had already called the Rangers, and we were organizing everyone we knew who could help search. The first responders told us to wait until morning, that Jason knew those trails better than anyone and had probably just decided to camp out. But something in my gut told me this was different. At first light, about 30 of us gathered at the trailhead parking area. The search and rescue coordinator, a weathered woman named Diane who'd been doing this for 20 years, split us into groups of 4 and assigned us sections of the trail. My group got the first 3 miles, the easiest part, which made sense since I wasn't exactly an expert hiker like Jason. The snow from the previous night had left about 2 inches of fresh powder on the ground, and that's when we found the first thing that made everyone stop talking. Jason's boot prints were clear as day, those distinctive Salomon treads he always wore, heading up the trail at a steady pace. We could see where he'd stopped to adjust his pack, where he'd stepped aside to let someone pass, where he'd paused to probably take a photo at the scenic overlook. Following his tracks was like reading his morning in perfect detail, each step preserved in the snow like he'd left them just minutes ago. The weird part started around mile marker 2. Jason's tracks suddenly became erratic, like he'd started jogging, then sprinting, his stride length nearly doubling. But here's what made no sense. There were no other tracks around his, nothing chasing him, no animal prints, no signs of another person, just Jason's boots hitting the ground harder and faster, veering off the main trail into the tree line. We followed them through the pines, branches still showing where he'd pushed through, until we reached a small clearing about 50 yards from the trail. And that's where everything just stopped. His footprints led right to the center of this clearing, maybe 20 feet across, and then nothing. The snow beyond was completely untouched, like he'd just ceased to exist mid-stride. No backtracking, no signs of him climbing a tree, no disturbance in the snow canopy above. Diane stood there for a full minute, walking the perimeter of that clearing, checking and rechecking what we were all seeing. The search team spent the entire day combing every inch of that mountain. Dogs were brought in, and they tracked Jason's scent to that exact same clearing before going crazy, whining and circling like they'd hit an invisible wall. A helicopter with thermal imaging flew grid patterns until dark, picking up deer, a couple of black bears denning up for winter, but no heat signature that could be Jason. The state police arrived around noon and immediately started treating it like a crime scene. Even though there was no evidence of foul play, they took photos of every footprint, measured the stride length, analyzed the pattern of his movement. One detective kept asking if Jason had any enemies, if he owed anyone money, if he'd been acting strange lately. But Jason was the most straightforward guy you'd ever meet. Worked as a physical therapist, coached Little League on weekends, had been planning his wedding to his girlfriend Amy for next spring. The only unusual thing anyone could remember was Jason mentioning he'd seen some old survey markers on his last hike up Crow Pass, the kind they used in the 60s for geological studies, but that hardly seemed relevant. By the second day, the story had made the local news, and volunteers were showing up from Anchorage, Girdwood, even some from Fairbanks. The military sent a specialized Arctic rescue unit, and someone brought ground-penetrating radar to check if he'd fallen into a hidden crevasse or snow cave. They found nothing. The clearing became command central, with investigators studying every inch of ground. That's when one of the forensics guys noticed something that made everyone reconsider what we were dealing with. The snow in Jason's final footprints had an unusual quality to it. It was compressed differently than his other tracks, denser, like it had been subjected to enormous pressure. They took samples back to the lab and found microscopic glass spheres in the snow, the kind that only forms under extreme heat. But there were no burn marks, no signed vegetation, no evidence of any heat source at all. Just those tiny beads of glass mixed into the snow where Jason's tracks ended. On day 3, Amy showed up at the search site with something that changed everything. She'd gone through Jason's home office, desperate for any clue, and found a folder he'd hidden behind his filing cabinet. Inside were printed emails and documents about something called Project Greenlight, dated from the 1960s. The papers described atmospheric testing conducted on Crow Pass, some kind of military research into electromagnetic pulses and their effects on weather patterns. Jason had apparently been researching this for months, cross-referencing old military records with geological surveys. There were photos he'd taken of those survey markers, notes about unusual magnetic readings on his compass, and a map where he'd marked several locations with red X's. The clearing where his tracks ended was circled 3 times in black ink, with a note in Jason's handwriting. Source point, November 1967 incident. 2 researchers missing, never found. Amy said Jason had become obsessed with these findings recently, but didn't want to worry anyone. Thought people would think he was being paranoid. The military response to those documents was immediate and unsettling. Within 2 hours of Amy showing them to the state police, the entire trail was closed to civilians. People in hazmat suits arrived and set up a perimeter around the clearing. They brought in equipment I'd never seen before. Large panels that looked like satellite dishes, machines that hummed with a low frequency you could feel in your chest. My family was told to go home, that professionals were handling it now. But I stayed hidden in the trees with my dad's hunting binoculars, watched them work through the night. They were taking core samples from the ground, setting up sensors in a precise grid pattern. Around midnight, one of their machines started going haywire, lights flashing red, that humming sound growing louder until it was almost unbearable. Then, for just a second, I saw something that still makes me question my own eyes. The air in the center of the clearing seemed to ripple, like heat waves off hot asphalt, except it was 15 degrees outside. The snow in that exact spot where Jason's tracks ended began to swirl upward in a perfect spiral, defying gravity, before suddenly dropping back down. The next morning, the official story changed completely. The news reported that Jason had been found, suffering from severe hypothermia, near a ranger station 15 miles north of where we'd been searching. They said he'd gotten disoriented in the snow, wandered off trail and survived by building a snow shelter. But here's the thing, I went to see him in the hospital, and the person in that bed wasn't my brother. I mean, it was him physically. Same scar on his chin from a bike accident when we were kids, same tattoo of mountain coordinates on his wrist, even knew things only Jason would know. But something fundamental was different. He spoke in this measured, careful way, like he was translating thoughts from another language. His eyes would focus on empty spaces in the room, tracking something invisible. When I asked him about the clearing, about what happened when his tracks ended, he just stared at me for the longest time before saying, "I was walking, then I was walking somewhere else, then I was walking back." The doctors said trauma and hypothermia could cause personality changes, memory gaps, but Amy knew it too. She called off their engagement a week later, said it was like looking at Jason through frosted glass. What really convinced me something impossible had happened was when I snuck back to the clearing 2 weeks later, before the snow melted. The military equipment was gone, but they'd left markers in the ground, small metal posts arranged in a perfect circle. I brought my own compass, and just like Jason's notes described, it spun wildly near the center. But the truly terrifying part was what I found buried in the snow. Jason's watch, the GPS watch he never hiked without, still running, still keeping perfect time. Except according to its data log, it had recorded Jason walking for 11 days straight after he disappeared, covering over 300 miles, reaching elevations that don't exist on Crow Pass or anywhere in Alaska. The path on the GPS looked like someone had been walking through empty space, moving in 3 dimensions without regard for actual terrain. When I showed it to Jason, he looked at it for a long moment, then deleted all the data and handed it back to me. "Some trails aren't meant to be mapped," he said, and that was the last time he ever spoke about any of it. Jason quit his job as a physical therapist 6 months later, sold his house, and bought a small cabin near the Canadian border. He doesn't hike anymore, won't even drive past a trailhead. The few times I've visited, I've found notebooks filled with equations I don't understand, diagrams of dimensional folding, references to something he calls the between spaces. He started corresponding with other people who've had similar experiences. A woman from Norway who vanished for 3 days in a fjord. A park ranger from Montana who lost a week in Glacier National Park. All of them found in places they shouldn't have been. All of them changed in ways they can't explain. They share coordinates, dates, atmospheric conditions, looking for patterns. Jason showed me a map once where he'd marked every incident he could verify. There are hundreds of them, clustered around specific geological features, many near old military testing sites. He believes the testing in the 60s didn't create weapons. It accidentally opened something, created thin spots in reality where people can slip through. The military knows about it, monitors these locations, but they can't close what they don't understand. The Crow Pass Trail reopened to the public this past summer, with a new route that bypasses that clearing entirely. They said it was for trail improvements, but I've seen the satellite images. There's a permanent installation there now, disguised as a weather station. Jason sent me one last email before he stopped using technology altogether, just coordinates and a date. The exact location and time he disappeared. When I checked the military records Amy had found, that date matched a test called Green Light Echo in 1967, described as a successful dimensional resonance experiment. The 2 missing researchers from that incident were found 3 weeks later in a hospital in Japan, with no memory of how they got there, speaking in equations for days before returning to normal. Neither of them ever fully recovered. I think about Jason every day, about who or what came back from that mountain. He seems content in his isolation, but sometimes when we talk on the phone, I hear him pause mid-sentence like he's listening to something far away, and he'll whisper, "They're walking again," before hanging up. I don't hike anymore either. I was 17 that summer, just another kid from Juneau trying to make the most of those endless daylight hours we get in July. My dad ran a small hardware store downtown, and I spent most weekdays helping him stock shelves and mix paint for tourists who'd decided their vacation rental needed a touch-up. Life was predictable, quiet even, until that Saturday when everything went sideways. My buddy Connor had just gotten his license, and his older brother's beat-up Chevy Silverado became our ticket to freedom. We'd been talking about checking out the old Perseverance mine entrance for weeks, ever since Connor's uncle mentioned it at a barbecue. The mine had been shut down since the 1920s, and locals always warned kids to stay away. Unstable ground, they said, old dynamite residue, toxic gases. But when you're 17 and invincible, those warnings just make it more appealing. There were 5 of us packed into that truck, me, Connor driving, his girlfriend Madison in the passenger seat, and my friends Lucas and Kai squeezed in the back with me. The road out there was rough, all gravel and potholes, winding through thick spruce forest for about 40 minutes before we reached the trailhead. Connor parked the truck in a small clearing where the old mining road used to continue, now just overgrown with Devil's Club and alder bushes. We grabbed our flashlights. Connor had these powerful LED ones he'd stolen from his dad's construction site, and started hiking up the trail. The entrance wasn't hard to find. It was this gaping black mouth in the mountainside, maybe 8 feet high and just as wide, with rusted metal tracks still visible leading inside. Someone had spray-painted "Keep Out" across a wooden barrier that had long since rotted and fallen to the side. The temperature dropped at least 15 degrees as soon as we stepped inside, and our breath came out in little white puffs that danced in the flashlight beams. The tunnel walls were slick with moisture, and every 20 feet or so, thick wooden support beams crossed overhead, most of them black with rot and sagging in the middle. Connor kept making jokes about cave-ins to scare Madison, who punched his arm every time, but I could tell even he was getting nervous the deeper we went. About 200 feet in, the main tunnel branched into 3 different passages. Lucas wanted to split up, said we could cover more ground that way, but Kai shut that down immediately. Smart kid. We took the middle tunnel, which sloped downward at a gentle angle, and that's when we started seeing things that didn't belong. First, it was just some empty beer cans, probably from other kids who'd been brave or stupid enough to come down here. But then Madison's flashlight caught something metallic against the wall, and when we got closer, we realized it was a wristwatch, expensive looking, still ticking somehow despite the moisture. Connor picked it up and wiped the face clean with his shirt. It was a Tag Heuer, easily worth a couple grand. That should have been our first real warning sign, but we were too caught up in the adventure to think straight. Another 50 feet down the tunnel, Kai spotted something bundled up in an alcove to our left. It was a North Face jacket, bright red, barely dirty at all. Couldn't have been there more than a few weeks. Madison unzipped the pockets and found a wallet inside. Washington State driver's license for some guy named Bradley Thorne, 32 years old, credit card still there, $80 in cash. Lucas found another jacket nearby, this one black Columbia rain gear, and stuffed underneath it was a purple backpack with university textbooks inside. The name written in the front cover was Jennifer Huang, and there was a student ID from UW dated just 3 months ago. We stood there in the dancing flashlight beams, passing these items between us, and the joking stopped completely. These weren't artifacts from decades past. People had been here recently, and they'd left in such a hurry they didn't even grab their wallets. Madison wanted to leave right then, and honestly, I was with her. But Connor insisted we should go just a little further. Maybe find out what happened to these people. Kai suggested we take photos of the IDs and report it to the police later, which seemed reasonable enough. We continued down the tunnel, our footsteps echoing weirdly in the darkness, and the air grew thicker, mustier. About 100 feet further, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, maybe 30 feet across, with multiple passages branching off in different directions. Our flashlights swept across the space, revealing more abandoned items scattered around. Sleeping bags still rolled out, a camping stove with a half-cooked can of beans congealed on top, more backpacks, even a pair of hiking boots placed neatly side by side, as if someone had just taken them off for the night. Lucas counted at least 7 different sets of belongings, all from different people based on the variety of styles and sizes. The worst part was this notebook we found near one of the sleeping bags. Madison picked it up and started reading out loud, but her voice got quieter with each word. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. Day 3. They come at night. Can hear them in the walls. Bradley thinks we should try to run, but Jennifer says they're watching the entrance. The scratching is getting louder. The entry cut off mid-sentence, and the next few pages had been torn out. Connor grabbed the notebook from Madison and flipped through it. More entries, different handwriting, like multiple people had been using it. One page just had the same word written over and over. Inside, 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 inside. Another had what looked like a crude map of the tunnel system with X marks at various points, and arrows pointing deeper into the mountain. At the bottom, someone had written in block letters, "They live in the deep shafts. Don't let them know you're here." My chest felt tight reading that, and I realized we'd all unconsciously moved closer together, our flashlight beams sweeping nervously across the dark tunnel mouths surrounding us. That's when we heard it, a sound that definitely wasn't made by any of us. It came from one of the deeper tunnels, this rhythmic scraping noise, like metal being dragged across rock. Then it stopped. We all held our breath, listening, and after maybe 10 seconds, we heard it again, but from a different tunnel. Closer. Connor whispered that we needed to get out immediately, and nobody argued. We started backing toward the tunnel we'd come from, trying to move quietly but quickly. The scraping sound came again, and this time it was followed by something else, a wet shuffling noise like someone walking through mud with bare feet. Madison grabbed Connor's arm so hard he dropped his flashlight, and it rolled across the floor, the beam spinning crazily before stopping with the light pointing directly down one of the dark passages. For just a second, I swear I saw something move back there, pulling back into the shadows. Not an animal, the movement was too deliberate, too calculated. It knew we were watching. We ran. There's no other way to describe it. We just turned and bolted back up the tunnel, our flashlights bouncing wildly, creating insane shadows on the walls. Behind us, that scraping sound multiplied, like whatever was making it had friends, and they were all moving now. Lucas tripped over something and went down hard, skinning his palms on the rough ground, but Kai and I hauled him up without even stopping. The branch in the tunnel where we'd made our first choice appeared ahead, and we veered left, sprinting toward that distant circle of daylight. Madison was crying, Connor was cursing under his breath, and I could hear my own ragged breathing echoing off the walls. The entrance seemed so far away, but we pushed harder, our legs burning, lungs screaming for air. When we finally burst out into the afternoon sunlight, we didn't stop running until we reached the truck, all of us piling against it, gasping and shaking. Connor fumbled for his keys, hands trembling so bad he dropped them twice before managing to get them out of his pocket. But something was wrong. The truck was listing to one side, and when we walked around to look, all 4 tires had been slashed, not just punctured, but absolutely shredded, with long gashes that went all the way through the rubber. The vinyl seats visible through the windows had been torn apart too, stuffing scattered everywhere like someone had gone at them with a knife in a rage. Connor tried his keys anyway, desperate, but they didn't even fit in the ignition anymore. Someone had jammed something into the lock and broken it off inside. The hood was popped open, and when Lucas checked, half the engine components were missing or destroyed. Hoses cut, battery cables severed. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone had methodically made sure we couldn't leave. Madison started hyperventilating, and Kai was trying to get signal on his phone, walking in circles with it held high above his head. But we all knew there was no coverage out here. We were 40 minutes from town by car, and that was assuming you didn't get lost on the unmarked Forest Service roads. The sun was already starting to sink toward the mountains, maybe 3 hours of daylight left at most. Connor kept saying we should start walking, follow the road back, but Madison pointed out what we were all thinking. Whoever did this to the truck was probably still around, watching, waiting. They knew we'd gone into the mine, knew we'd found those things, and they wanted to make sure we couldn't tell anyone. Lucas suggested we go back to the mine entrance, maybe find another way through the mountain, but that idea died the moment he said it out loud. We weren't going back in there. Not after what we'd heard. So we stood there by the ruined truck, 5 teenagers in the middle of nowhere, trying to figure out our next move while the forest around us grew darker and the shadows longer. That's when Kai noticed something carved into a tree near where Connor had parked. Fresh cuts in the bark, still weeping sap. It was a date, 08/03/2023. That was only 2 weeks ago. Below it was carved, B. Thorne was here. Bradley Thorne, the name from the Washington driver's license we'd found in the mine. We decided to stick together and start walking back toward town, staying on the main road. Connor grabbed a tire iron from the truck bed. Lucas found a broken piece of rebar on the ground, and the rest of us picked up whatever rocks we could carry. Pathetic weapons, but they made us feel slightly less helpless. We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when we heard an engine in the distance, not coming from the direction of town, but from deeper in the forest, from one of the old logging roads that crisscrossed the area. We ducked into the trees and waited, hearts pounding, as an ancient Ford Bronco rumbled past, going slow, windows too dark to see inside. It stopped about 50 yards past where we were hiding, and the driver killed the engine. We held our breath, pressed against the wet moss and ferns, mosquitoes buzzing around our faces but nobody daring to swat them away. After what felt like hours but was probably only 5 minutes, the Bronco started up again and continued down the road toward the mine. That's when Connor made the call. We were going to cut through the forest, avoid the road entirely, and try to hit the main highway about 5 miles cross-country. It took us 6 hours of bushwhacking through Devil's Club and climbing over fallen logs to finally reach Route 7, and by then it was past midnight, our clothes torn, bodies covered in scratches and bug bites. A state trooper picked us up after about 10 minutes of walking along the highway. Connor's dad had called it in when we didn't come home. We told the trooper everything, showed him the photos Kai had taken of the IDs, explained about the truck. He radiated skepticism until he called it in and found out that Bradley Thorne and Jennifer Huang were both reported missing, along with 5 other people, all last seen in the Juneau area over the past 2 months. The next day, a whole team of cops and search and rescue went out to the mine. They found our truck just like we'd left it, found all the belongings in the mine, but no bodies, no sign of what had been making those sounds. The investigation went on for weeks, made the news all the way down in Seattle, but they never found those missing people. The mine entrance was sealed with concrete a month later, officially due to public safety concerns. Connor's family moved to Anchorage that winter. Madison and I broke up when she went to college in Oregon, and none of us really talk about it anymore. But sometimes I drive past the trailhead. They put up a gate now, heavy-duty steel with federal warning signs, and I wonder if those things, whatever they were, are still down there in the deep shafts, waiting, or if they found another way out. The wind was already picking up when we pulled into the narrow driveway that led to Kevin's cabin, about 40 miles outside Nome. It was late February 2024, and I'd been working as a dental hygienist in Anchorage for about 8 years at that point. Kevin was an old college friend who'd inherited this place from his grandfather and only used it during hunting season. When my ex-husband suddenly canceled his weekend with the kids and I'd already promised them we'd go somewhere special for winter break, Kevin offered his cabin without hesitation. My daughters, Olivia, who was 9, and Hannah, who had just turned 7, were bouncing in their seats, excited about spending 4 days in what they called the Wilderness House. The GPS had given up about 20 minutes earlier, and I was following Kevin's handwritten directions, squinting through the increasingly heavy snowfall to spot the wooden marker he'd mentioned. I remember feeling genuinely grateful as we hauled our bags inside, the girls immediately claiming the loft bedroom, while I settled into the main floor's single bedroom. The cabin was bigger than I'd expected, with thick log walls and double-paned windows that Kevin had installed just last year. He'd left detailed notes everywhere: how to work the generator if the power went out, where the extra firewood was stacked under the tarp, which neighbor to call in case of emergency, though the closest one was about 3 miles away. The girls spent that first evening exploring every corner, fascinated by the mounted fish on the walls and the old snowshoes hanging by the stone fireplace. By the time I got them fed and into their pajamas, the weather report on the radio was calling for a significant storm system moving in faster than expected. I wasn't worried, though. We had enough food for a week, the propane tank was full, and the cabin felt solid and warm against the growing chaos outside. Around midnight, I woke up to complete silence, which somehow felt louder than any noise could have been. The power had gone out, and the darkness was so absolute I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, using its light to find the flashlight Kevin had left in the drawer. The generator was in a shed about 30 feet from the cabin, and there was no way I was going out there in the middle of the storm. I could hear the wind starting to pick up again, whistling through the trees with this low, constant moan that made the walls creak. I decided to check on the girls, tiptoeing up the narrow stairs to the loft. They were both sound asleep, Hannah curled up against her sister, their breathing steady and peaceful. I pulled their blanket up higher and was about to head back down when I heard it. 3 heavy, deliberate thuds against the back door, the one that faced the tree line. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a branch had fallen against the door, or some piece of loose equipment was being thrown around by the wind. But then it came again. 3 more impacts, evenly spaced, with enough force that I could hear something rattle in the kitchen below. There was a rhythm to it, a purposefulness that made every muscle in my body tense up. I stood there at the top of the stairs, gripping the flashlight so hard my knuckles ached, waiting for it to happen again. Minutes passed, maybe 5, maybe 10, with just the wind and my own heartbeat filling the silence. Then, Just as I was starting to convince myself I'd imagined the pattern, the knocking returned. But this time it was different. Instead of 3 knocks, there was a series of impacts, faster and more aggressive, like someone or something was trying to break through. The door was solid oak with a deadbolt and a chain lock that Kevin had insisted I use, but I could hear it straining against its frame with each blow. I crept down the stairs, each step seeming to scream under my weight despite my attempts to move silently. The kitchen was at the back of the cabin, and the door in question led out to a small covered porch that Kevin used for storing fishing gear in the summer. Through the small window next to the door, all I could see was swirling white and darkness beyond. The knocking had stopped again, replaced by an odd scratching sound, like fingernails. No, more like claws, dragging across the wood. I thought about calling 911, but my phone had no signal. Hadn't had one since we'd arrived. The satellite phone Kevin mentioned in his notes was in the shed with the generator. I stood there in the kitchen, the beam of my flashlight dancing across the walls as I tried to steady myself, when I noticed something that made my breath catch. The doorknob was turning, slowly, testing, first one way, then the other, with deliberate patience. I grabbed the biggest knife from the wooden block on the counter and backed away until I hit the far wall of the living room, keeping the flashlight trained on that door. The knob stopped moving, and for a moment everything went quiet except for the storm. Then came a sound I'll never forget. A long, drawn-out scraping along the entire height of the door, from top to bottom, like something was measuring it, testing its dimensions. Whatever was out there began pushing against the door, not knocking anymore but applying steady pressure. I could see the deadbolt holding, but the wood around it was starting to splinter. The frame itself was creaking, and tiny chips of paint were falling from where the door met the jamb. That's when Olivia called out from upstairs, her voice groggy and confused, asking what that noise was. I had to make a choice, stay and watch whatever was trying to get in or go to my children. I raced up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, and found both girls sitting up in bed, Hannah now crying softly while Olivia had her arm around her. I told them there was just some debris hitting the cabin in the storm, that everything was fine, but we were going to play a game where we all stayed very quiet in the bathroom. It was the only room in the cabin without windows, just a small ventilation fan in the ceiling. I grabbed all the blankets and pillows I could carry, brought them into the bathroom, and made a nest in the bathtub for the girls. The pounding downstairs had resumed, now accompanied by what sounded like multiple points of impact, as if more than one thing was trying to force entry. I could hear wood splintering, larger pieces now, and something that sounded like the kitchen chairs being knocked over. I locked the bathroom door, pushed the heavy oak cabinet against it, and sat on the floor with my back pressed against the cabinet, the knife still clutched in my right hand. The girls were asking questions. Why were we in the bathroom? What was that sound? When could we go back to bed? And I had to keep making up stories while listening to the destruction happening below us. The noises went on for what must have been an hour, maybe more. Sometimes it would stop completely for 10 or 15 minutes, and just when I'd start to hope it was over, it would begin again with renewed violence. At some point I heard glass breaking. The kitchen window, I thought. And then heavy footsteps, or what sounded like footsteps but with a strange dragging quality, as if something was being pulled across the floor. The ceiling beneath us creaked with the weight of whatever was moving through the cabin. I could track its movement through the living room, into my bedroom, then back to the kitchen. It was searching for something, or someone. The girls had finally fallen asleep in the tub, exhausted from fear they didn't fully understand, and I sat there in the dark, the flashlight off to preserve battery, listening to our cabin being systematically ransacked. Then came the worst part. The footsteps were on the stairs. Each step was deliberate, heavy, and accompanied by that dragging sound, like something wet and heavy was being pulled up with each movement. The stairs in Kevin's cabin were old and loud. I knew exactly which step it was on by the specific creaks and groans. 4th step, 5th step, 6th. There were 12 steps total. I pressed harder against the cabinet, my legs braced against the opposite wall, ready to fight if whatever it was managed to get through. The hallway outside the bathroom went silent after the 12th step. I could feel it out there, waiting, listening maybe. Then I heard breathing, deep ragged breathing that seemed to come from a much larger chest than any person should have. It was right outside the door. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then nothing. The breathing continued for several minutes, so close I swear I could feel the door warming up from its presence on the other side. A new sound started, sniffing, like a dog but deeper, more guttural. It was smelling around the door frame, particularly near the bottom where the gap was slightly wider. I held my breath, terrified that it could somehow smell our fear, smell us hiding just feet away. Hannah stirred in the tub, making a small whimpering sound in her sleep, and instantly the sniffing stopped. There was a low rumble, not quite a growl, but something similar, something that made the door vibrate slightly. Then, without warning, something slammed into the door with tremendous force. The cabinet jumped, sliding an inch despite my weight against it. Another impact, and another. The wood was starting to crack. I could see splinters forming in the door panel through the gap above the cabinet. Whatever was out there wasn't just strong. It was determined. Between impacts, I could hear it making these sounds. Not quite human, not quite animal, but something caught horribly between the two. It was trying to speak, or at least that's what it sounded like. These garbled, wet attempts at words that never quite formed into anything recognizable. Just when I thought the door would give way completely, everything stopped. The breathing, the impacts, even the wind outside seemed to pause. I stayed pressed against that cabinet for another 2 hours, maybe 3, until the first pale light of dawn started filtering through the ventilation fan above us. Only when I could clearly see the girls' faces in the natural light did I dare to slowly, carefully, slide the cabinet away from the door. I didn't open it right away. I pressed my ear against it, listening for any sign of movement outside. Nothing. Finally, with the knife raised and ready, I unlocked the door and pushed it open just a crack. The hallway was destroyed. Long gouges in the walls at about chest height, the carpet torn into strips, and a smell like rotting meat mixed with wet dog that made me gag. But whatever had been there was gone. I checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding spot while the girls stayed locked in the bathroom. The back door was hanging off its hinges, the frame completely shattered, wood splinters scattered across the kitchen floor like broken teeth. The moment I saw our car was still intact and the keys were still in my pocket, I ran back upstairs, wrapped the girls in their blankets without explaining anything, and carried them one at a time to the car. I didn't pack a single thing, didn't even grab our phones or wallets. I just needed to get us away from that place. As I was backing out of the driveway, Olivia, now fully awake, pointed toward the tree line and asked why there were such big marks in the snow. I looked where she was pointing and saw them. Deep drag marks like something massive had been pulled from our back door into the forest, disappearing between the dark pines. The tracks were at least 3 feet wide, pressed deep into the snow, and they went on as far as I could see into the woods. We drove straight through to Anchorage, 8 hours without stopping except for gas, and I never told Kevin the real reason why his back door needed to be replaced. I just sent him money for the repairs and said a bear had tried to get in during the storm. To this day, I don't know what came to that cabin, what wanted so desperately to get inside. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night and hear any unexpected sound, I remember that breathing outside the bathroom door, those wet, malformed attempts at speech, and I pull my own daughters a little closer. Everyone always tells you to trust your gut when something doesn't feel right, but nobody really prepares you for that moment when your instincts might be the only thing standing between you and something terrible. I was 24, fresh out of nursing school, and had just landed my first real job at a hospital in Anchorage. It was late March 2014, and I'd been driving that same stretch of the Seward Highway twice a week to visit my boyfriend who lived down in Kenai. The drive usually took about 3 hours, and I'd gotten comfortable enough with it that I'd started making the trip at night after my shifts ended, figuring the roads would be emptier and I could make better time. That particular Friday, I'd pulled a double shift and didn't get out until almost 11 p.m., but I was determined to make it down for the weekend like I'd promised. The Seward Highway at night is something else entirely. Just you, the mountains on one side, the water on the other, and this endless ribbon of asphalt that seems to swallow up your headlights. I'd been driving for about an hour when I saw the car up ahead, maybe a quarter mile, with its hazard lights blinking in this steady rhythm that cut through the darkness. It was an older sedan, dark blue or maybe black, pulled off to the side but not completely. The back end was still sticking out into the shoulder. My first thought was that someone had broken down, and being a nurse, I felt this automatic pull to stop and help. I started easing off the gas, moving into the left lane to give them room, already mentally running through what emergency supplies I had in my trunk. But as I got closer, maybe 100 feet away, my high beam swept across the scene and I saw something that made every muscle in my body go rigid. There was someone crouched down behind the car, pressed against the back bumper like they were trying to stay hidden from anyone approaching. They weren't checking a tire or looking at the engine. They were deliberately positioned to be invisible until you got close enough that stopping would put you right next to them. The person was wearing all black, including what looked like a ski mask, and they had their head turned watching my approach while staying perfectly still in that unnatural crouch. In that split second, my brain processed a dozen wrong details. No tools scattered around, no jack visible. The hood wasn't even popped, and most disturbing of all, I could see through the back window that there was someone else sitting in the driver's seat, just sitting there, not moving, not looking back for help. My foot found the gas pedal before I even made the conscious decision, and I swerved back into my lane, accelerating past that car like my life depended on it. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it over the engine, and I kept checking my rearview mirror, trying to process what I'd just seen. The hazard lights were still blinking behind me, growing smaller, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe there was some explanation I hadn't considered. Then I saw headlights flip on behind me, not from the car that had been stopped, but from somewhere further back where the road curved, like another vehicle had been waiting in the darkness with its lights off. The headlights were gaining on me fast, much faster than anyone should be driving on that winding highway, and within 30 seconds they were right on my tail, so close their high beams lit up my entire interior like daylight. I was already doing 70 in a 55 zone, my little Toyota Corolla shaking from the speed, but they stayed glued to my bumper, close enough that I couldn't even see their hood in my mirror. I tried everything I could think of, tapping my brakes to signal them to back off, speeding up to 80 even though the curves made me feel like I might flip, even putting on my hazards thinking maybe they'd realize I was in distress. Nothing worked. They matched every move, and when I slowed down for a particularly sharp turn near Beluga Point, they actually bumped me. Not hard enough to send me off the road, but a deliberate tap that sent my car lurching forward and made me bite down so hard on my tongue I tasted blood. That's when I knew this wasn't road rage or some drunk driver. They were trying to force me to stop. My phone was in my purse on the passenger floor where it had fallen, and reaching for it would mean taking my eyes off the road while going nearly 90 miles per hour. The highway was completely empty except for us, no other headlights in either direction, and the pull-offs I was flying past were just patches of darkness that looked more like traps than escape routes. Then they hit me again, harder this time, and my car fishtailed toward the guardrail that was the only thing between me and a drop straight into Turnagain Arm. I managed to correct it, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached, and that's when I remembered something from a self-defense class I'd taken in college. If someone's following you, drive to a police station or somewhere public. Never go home. Never stop in isolation. But the nearest town was still 40 miles away, and I didn't know if I had 40 miles worth of luck left. The car behind me was swerving now, trying to pull alongside me, and I could see it was a large SUV, maybe a Tahoe or something similar, with tinted windows so dark I couldn't make out anything inside. Every time they got close to pulling even with me, I'd swerve toward them, forcing them to fall back or risk hitting the mountain wall, but I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. Just when I thought I was going to either crash or get run off the road, I saw a pinprick of light ahead. The Sunrise Inn, this little 24-hour gas station and diner combo that serviced truckers heading through. It was maybe 2 miles away, and I started flashing my high beams frantically, honking my horn in long, desperate blasts, praying someone would see me coming. The SUV must have noticed where I was heading because they rammed me again, harder than before, sending my back end sliding sideways. I felt the tires lose grip for a terrifying second before they caught asphalt again, and I jerked the wheel hard right, aiming for the exit ramp like my life depended on it, which it probably did. The SUV tried to follow but took the turn too fast and too wide, their back end swinging out, and that gave me just enough time to rocket into the gas station parking lot, laying on my horn the entire way. I skidded to a stop right in front of the glass doors where I could see the clerk inside, a heavy-set woman with gray hair, who looked up startled from her magazine. I practically fell out of my car, leaving it running, doors open, and ran inside screaming for her to call 911. The SUV had pulled into the far end of the parking lot, just sitting there with its engine running, those dark windows reflecting the station's fluorescent lights. The clerk, bless her soul, didn't ask questions. She grabbed the phone and started dialing while pulling a baseball bat from behind the counter. We watched through the windows as the SUV sat there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, then slowly reversed and pulled back onto the highway, heading back the direction we'd come from. I was shaking so badly the clerk had to help me to a chair, and when the state troopers arrived 15 minutes later, I could barely get the words out to explain what had happened. The troopers took my statement and went back to check on that stranded vehicle I'd described. When they returned an hour later, their faces told me everything before they even spoke. They'd found the sedan abandoned, no hazard lights, no people, but there were fresh tire marks in the gravel, suggesting multiple vehicles had been parked there recently. The car had been reported stolen from Anchorage 2 days earlier, and there were rope fibers on the back seat and zip ties scattered on the floor. One of the troopers, a younger guy named Officer Brennan, told me quietly that there had been 3 similar incidents in the past month. Women traveling alone on that stretch of highway who'd reported being followed aggressively after passing what looked like a breakdown. 2 of them hadn't been as lucky as me. One had been forced off the road near Bird Creek and managed to lock herself in her car until help arrived. And the other, they'd found her car abandoned 20 miles from where she'd called 911, her phone still playing the recorded line. The clerk, whose name was Dottie, made me coffee with extra sugar and wouldn't let me leave until my boyfriend arrived to follow me the rest of the way. She told me she'd been working that station for 12 years and had seen enough to know when someone's guardian angel was working overtime. While we waited, she showed me the security footage from her cameras. You could see the SUV pulling in, and even though the quality was grainy, you could make out that there were at least 2 people in the front seats. What made my stomach turn was when she rewound it further and showed me that same SUV had driven past the station heading north about 2 hours before I'd arrived, moving slow like they were scouting. They'd been out there hunting, and I'd almost driven right into their trap. The investigation went on for weeks, but they never caught anyone. The SUV was found burned out in a gravel pit near Girdwood 3 days later, stripped of plates and VIN numbers. The police theorized it was a team, probably 3 or 4 people, using the breakdown scenario to target women traveling alone at night. They'd have one person hide behind the bait car to grab anyone who stopped, while others waited in vehicles nearby to block escape routes. The detective assigned to my case said I'd done everything right, trusting my instincts, not stopping, getting to a public place. But what really saved me was probably that I'd seen the person hiding before I'd slowed down enough for the trap to spring. If I'd gotten out to help, or even just stopped to ask if they needed assistance through my window, I would have been another missing person case on a highway that already had too many. I never drove that road at night again. Actually, I ended up breaking up with my boyfriend 2 months later and took a job in Colorado, partially because I couldn't shake the feeling every time I saw a car with hazard lights. The detective called me about 6 months after I'd moved to tell me they'd arrested a group matching the description in connection with an attempted kidnapping near Fairbanks. But the case fell apart when witnesses couldn't make positive identifications. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd left work 5 minutes earlier or later that night, if I'd taken a different route, if my headlights hadn't caught that figure crouched in the darkness at just the right angle. Dottie was right about guardian angels, but I know the real reason I'm able to write this today is because something deep in my brain, some primitive survival instinct, recognized a predator lying in wait and refused to let me become prey. Trust that feeling. It's there for a reason, and it might be the only warning you get. "40 miles south of Adigan Pass, my Peterbilt went sideways on black ice and buried itself in a snowbank deeper than I am tall. I was 38, hauling equipment for North Star Logistics like I'd done for 12 years, making those long runs from Anchorage to Prudhoe Bay. Just another Tuesday in January, or at least that's what it was supposed to be. Living alone meant nobody would miss me for days, just my cat back home, probably already plotting revenge for the automatic feeder running empty. The weather service had promised clear skies until midnight, maybe some light flurries, nothing serious. But around 4 p.m., the horizon turned into this thick gray curtain moving toward me fast, like someone was pulling a blanket over the whole world. Within minutes, the temperature gauge on my dash dropped 15 degrees, and these fat snowflakes started hitting my windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. The wind hit like a freight train, slamming into the side of my trailer so hard I had to fight the wheel just to stay in my lane. Visibility went from miles to yards to absolutely nothing. Just this swirling chaos of white that made it impossible to tell where the road ended and the tundra began. I dropped down through the gears, crawling along at maybe 10 miles per hour, searching for any landmark that would tell me where I was. The mile markers had vanished. The pipeline that usually ran parallel to the highway was gone. Even the reflective posts along the shoulder had disappeared into the storm. Then came that moment every trucker dreads. The steering went weightless in my hands, that floating feeling that means you've lost traction completely. The whole rig started sliding sideways in this eerily quiet drift, the trailer pushing me toward what I thought was the shoulder, but turned out to be a drainage ditch packed with snow from the last storm. 18 wheels and 40 tons of steel just glided off the road like a toy, settling into that ditch with a soft crunch that left me tilted at a 20-degree angle, completely stuck. The engine was still running, but I knew I wasn't going anywhere without a heavy wrecker, and nothing was moving on that highway until the storm passed. I tried my phone. No signal, which was normal for that stretch even on good days. The CB radio just gave me static, nobody else stupid enough to be out in this mess. My fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, enough to keep the heater running for maybe 30 hours if I was careful, but these storms could last days. The temperature outside was already -20 and dropping fast. That's when I remembered the maintenance shed. There was one about a 1/4 mile back. I'd passed it right before the weather went to hell. These little shacks dot the whole highway, places where the road crews store salt and tools, sometimes hole up during storms. It meant leaving the truck, which goes against everything they teach you, but staying put meant burning through my fuel and possibly freezing to death if the storm outlasted my diesel. I grabbed my emergency bag, flashlight, flares, some energy bars, water bottles that were already starting to slush up, and wrapped myself in every layer I had. The moment I opened the door, the wind tried to rip it off the hinges. The cold hit like a physical thing, stealing my breath and making my eyes water instantly. Walking in that storm was like being underwater and on fire at the same time. I couldn't see more than 3 feet ahead. The snow was up to my knees, and the wind kept trying to knock me flat. I followed the slope of the ditch back up to the road, then tried to stay on what I hoped was the shoulder, using the wind direction to keep myself oriented. What should have been a 5-minute walk took almost 20, and by the time I spotted the dark shape of the shed through the storm, I couldn't feel my fingers anymore, even through my insulated gloves. The door was secured with a padlock, but the hasp was so rusted that 3 kicks broke it free. I practically fell inside, slamming the door behind me and collapsing against it, just grateful to be out of that screaming wind. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a space about 12 feet by 8 feet, walls made of corrugated metal that rattled with every gust. There were shelves along one wall holding bags of road salt, a few rusty shovels, and a broken spreader. But what caught my attention was the corner near the back. Someone had made themselves comfortable there. A thick moving blanket was spread on the floor, the kind we use to protect furniture, still relatively clean. Next to it sat a neat pyramid of empty soup cans, maybe 15 or 20 of them. Labels faded but readable. Campbell's, Progresso, brands you'd find at any grocery store. A camping lantern sat on an overturned bucket, and beside it, a small pile of paperback books, their pages swollen with moisture. Someone had been living here, or at least staying here regularly. The organization of it all made me uneasy. This wasn't some emergency shelter situation like mine. This was deliberate, planned. I moved closer to examine the makeshift living space, and that's when I noticed the walls. At first, I thought it was just scratches in the metal, maybe from equipment being moved around. But when I aimed my flashlight directly at them, I could see they were deliberate marks carved into the corrugated ridges. Numbers, mostly. Dates going back about 2 months, starting in early December. Next to each date were tally marks, sometimes just 1 or 2, sometimes up to 7 or 8. But it was what was carved between the dates that made me step back. Crude drawings of vehicles, trucks, cars, what looked like an SUV, each one with an X scratched through it. Below the vehicles were numbers, 1, 2, 1, 3, 2. At the bottom of all this, carved deeper than the rest, were 3 words that didn't make sense. They don't stop. My first thought was that whoever stayed here was tracking the traffic, maybe counting days until rescue. But why cross out the vehicles? And what did those other numbers mean? The storm outside was getting worse, the whole shed shaking like it might tear loose from its foundation. I figured I'd be stuck here for hours, maybe until morning, so I started exploring more carefully. Behind the bags of salt, I found a Coleman cooler, the old metal kind from the 70s. Inside were more empty cans, but also something that made my chest tighten: car keys. 5 different sets, each on different keychains. A fuzzy dice, a bottle opener shaped like a fish, a worn rabbit's foot, a small LED light, and a plastic tag from a rental company. These weren't from the same person. I dug deeper and found wallets, 3 of them, all with driver's licenses still inside. Gregory Ash from Wiseman, 42 years old. Bethany Carver from Fairbanks, 28. Robert Lang from Deadhorse, 51. The licenses were all current, none expired. There was cash in the wallets too, credit cards, family photos. Gregory had a picture of 2 kids in baseball uniforms. Bethany had one of herself with an older woman who looked like her mother. These people wouldn't just leave this stuff behind. I was still processing what I'd found when I heard something that wasn't the wind. A metallic scraping sound, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from outside. Through a small ventilation grate near the ceiling, I could barely make out a shape moving through the storm. Tall, hunched forward against the wind, dragging something behind it. The scraping stopped right outside the door. Then came 3 knocks, evenly spaced, patient. Not the frantic pounding of someone desperate for shelter, but calm, measured, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I held my breath, flashlight off, pressing myself against the far wall. The knocks came again, same pattern, same patience. Then a voice muffled by the wind but clear enough. "I know you're in there, same as the others were." The voice had this flat quality to it, no emotion, like someone reading from a script. "Your truck's not going anywhere, not in this storm, not ever really." A pause, then, The others thought they could wait it out too. Thought someone would come looking. But the highway's closed now. Won't open for days, maybe weeks. The door handle rattled, tested from outside. I gripped one of the rusty shovels, knowing how useless it would be if that door opened. Gregory lasted 6 days. The voice continued, conversational now, like we were old friends catching up. Kept talking about his kids, showing their pictures to anyone who'd look. Bethany made it 4. She tried to run on day 3, made it about 100 yards before the cold got her. Had to drag her back. The scraping sound returned, something heavy being repositioned outside the door. Robert was smart, tried to bargain, said he had money, connections in the oil companies, but money doesn't mean much out here. The voice got closer to the door, maybe pressed right against it. I've been watching your truck for the last hour. Peterbilt, nice rig, North Star logo on the door. They'll report you missing eventually, but by then the storm will have covered everything. Another accident on the Dalton. Happens every winter. My mouth was completely dry, my legs shaking as I tried to process what I was hearing. This person had killed at least 3 people, maybe more based on those tallies on the wall. Here's what happens now, the voice said, still maintaining that eerily calm tone. You can open this door and we can talk about your options. Or you can stay in there and I'll wait. I'm very good at waiting. I've got a place about half a mile from here, nice and warm. Generator, food, everything I need. You've got what, maybe a few energy bars? That shed gets down to -40 at night. The salt bags don't make very good insulation. The handle rattled again, harder this time. Oh, and don't bother with the ventilation grate. Already sealed it from outside while you were looking through those wallets. Carbon monoxide from that lantern will build up pretty quick in a space that small. I looked up at the grate and could see something dark pressed against it from outside. Cloth or plastic, I couldn't tell. The camping lantern on the bucket wasn't lit, but if I needed heat, if I tried to use it. 20 minutes, the voice said. That's how long I'll give you to think about it. Then I'm going to start making this uncomfortable. The scraping sound moved away from the door, followed by footsteps that quickly disappeared into the howling wind. My mind was racing through options, all of them bad. The wallets in my hands belonged to people who'd faced this same choice and were now presumably dead. But something about the whole setup bothered me. If this guy was such a successful predator, why leave evidence in the shed? Why let me find the wallets and keys? Then I remembered the carvings. They don't stop. Maybe those weren't his victim's words. Maybe they were his frustration. The numbers under each vehicle suddenly made sense. Passengers. He'd tried to get vehicles to stop, but they kept driving. The storm was his opportunity, forcing people off the road. I dug through my emergency bag with shaking fingers, found the flares. 4 of them. Not much, but maybe enough. I also had my knife, a folding buck my father gave me 20 years ago. The shed had those bags of road salt, the shovels, some chains hanging on the wall. I grabbed the heaviest chain, about 6 feet of it, and wrapped one end around my left hand. The door opened outward. I remembered fighting the wind to close it. If I could time it right when he came back. 15 minutes later, I heard the scraping again. Closer, stopping about 10 feet from the door. Time's up, friend. Winter's not getting any warmer. Then came a sound that made my gut clench. Liquid splashing against the metal walls. The sharp smell of gasoline cutting through the cold air. He was dousing the shed. Last chance to come out and talk, he called. Or we can do this the hard way. I knew I had seconds to decide. I lit all 4 flares at once, the red light filling the shed with hellish shadows, sulfur smoke already thick in the sealed space. Then I kicked the door open with everything I had. The wind caught it, slamming it wide, and I burst out into the storm, flares in one hand, chain swinging in the other. The man stumbled backward, caught off guard. He was shorter than I'd expected, wearing a Park Service uniform that was clearly stolen, too big for his frame. His face was gaunt, weathered, with pale blue eyes that looked completely hollow. He had a jerry can in one hand, a flare gun in the other. I threw 2 of my flares at him, the wind sending them spinning like fiery pinwheels. He raised his arm to block them, and I swung the chain, catching his wrist. The flare gun went off, the projectile shooting into the storm. We both went down in the snow, rolling and fighting for control. The fuel gauge needle was kissing empty when I finally spotted the turnoff for Copper Falls, a settlement so small it wasn't even marked on the GPS mounted to my dashboard. August 2013, middle of nowhere, Alaska. And there I was in my old Chevy Silverado, hauling mining equipment like I'd been doing for the past 2 years. 32 years old, 6 months out from a divorce that left me with weekend visitation rights and a mountain of legal bills. But at least the job paid enough to keep my daughter Claire in her private school back in Anchorage. The long supply runs between our main office and the remote sites usually gave me time to clear my head. Just me and the road, and maybe a podcast or two to break up the monotony. That day, though, I'd been driving for 8 hours straight, and with the next gas station still 40 miles out according to my notes, Copper Falls was my only option. An old-timer at a truck stop had mentioned the place months ago, said they sold diesel cheap if you didn't mind the 3-mile detour down a gravel road that would rattle your teeth loose. The settlement appeared suddenly after a final bend in the road. Maybe 20 buildings clustered in a clearing carved out of dense spruce forest. A general store with 2 ancient pumps out front, a handful of weathered houses with metal roofs, a small white church with a crooked steeple, and a one-room schoolhouse that looked like it hadn't seen fresh paint since the Reagan administration. The kind of place where everybody's grandfather had known everybody else's grandfather, where the biggest news was probably who caught the largest salmon last season. But the moment I rolled into what passed for Main Street, something made me ease off the gas pedal. It was 2 p.m. on a Monday, bright sunshine, perfect weather, yet the place had this weight to it, like the air was thicker somehow. Every house I passed had its front door hanging open, not wide open like they'd been abandoned in a hurry, but half open, the way you'd leave it if you were just stepping out to grab something from your truck and coming right back. Through those dark doorways, I could glimpse the ordinary details of interrupted lives. A TV still glowing in one living room, laundry hanging motionless on a back porch, a dog's water bowl sitting on a front step with the water still fresh and clear. I pulled up to the gas pumps, the crunch of gravel under my tires impossibly loud in all that quiet. No other vehicles anywhere, not even an old pickup or four-wheeler parked beside the houses. The credit card reader on the pump was wrapped in plastic with a sun-faded "See Attendant" sign taped to it, so I walked toward the store's entrance, my work boots echoing on the wooden steps. The door was propped open with a chunk of firewood, and inside I could hear the electric hum of refrigerators still running. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strange and flat, like the building was swallowing the sound. The lights were on, the cash register drawer hanging open with bills still in it, 20s, 10s, 5s, all neatly arranged in their slots. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a paper plate next to the register, one bite missing from the corner, the exposed bread still soft. Not dried out, not stale. Fresh, like someone had set it down minutes ago. The silence in that store was different from regular quiet. It had weight to it, presence, like when you're in a room and you know someone's standing right behind you even though you haven't turned around yet. I grabbed a 20 from my wallet and left it on the counter, then walked back outside to pump my own gas. The numbers on the old analog display clicked up slowly, each one unnaturally loud, and I kept scanning the empty street, the dark windows of the houses, waiting to see someone, anyone, step out and ask what I was doing. Nobody came. When I walked around the side of the store to find the diesel pump, I noticed the generator shed, door wide open, motor still running smooth and steady. Beyond that, a house with its kitchen window facing the store, and through the glass I could see a table set for dinner. 4 plates, silverware laid out neat, food still on them. Mashed potatoes with a pat of butter melting in the center, green beans that looked crisp, some kind of meat with gravy. Steam wasn't rising from the food anymore, but it hadn't congealed either, hadn't taken on that dull look that food gets when it's been sitting out too long. My first thought was maybe a gas leak, something that would make everyone evacuate fast. But there was no smell, no sirens, no emergency vehicles. I actually walked into that house, the door was open anyway, and checked the stove. Electric, turned off, everything normal. The refrigerator hummed, photos of kids and grandkids stuck to it with magnets from Fairbanks and Nome. A calendar on the wall marked with birthdays and Ruth's dentist appointment in blue pen for the following week. In the living room, a pair of reading glasses rested on the arm of a recliner, right next to a coffee mug that was still warm to the touch. Not hot, but warm, like someone had been sipping it maybe 20 minutes ago. A crossword puzzle book lay open on the side table, half completed. The pen balanced in the crease between pages. The TV was muted but turned to a news channel, the ticker at the bottom scrolling through weather updates and sports scores from that very day. I must have checked 6 or 7 houses, and they were all the same story. Lives paused mid-action, like someone had hit a cosmic pause button on the entire settlement. In one house, a bathtub was filled with water, still barely warm, bubbles clinging to the edges, a towel laid out on the toilet seat. In another, a sewing machine sat with fabric still under the needle, a straight line of stitches stopping abruptly mid-seam. The church was the strangest. Hymnals open on the pews, the piano bench pushed back like someone had stood up in the middle of playing, sheet music for Amazing Grace still propped up on the stand. But no purses, no car keys left behind, no cell phones forgotten on counters. Whatever had happened, people had taken those things with them. By 4 p.m., I'd covered the whole settlement, calling out until my throat was raw, and the only sound that came back was my own echo and the steady hum of all those still running appliances. I decided to wait in my truck until dark. Maybe someone would come back. Maybe there was some local emergency I didn't know about, a drill or something. The sun doesn't set quickly in Alaska during August. It's this long, drawn-out process that turns everything golden, then orange, then deep purple. I sat in my truck parked in front of the general store, windows cracked, eating one of my packed sandwiches even though my appetite was completely gone. Around 8 p.m., with the light finally starting to fade properly, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. My heart jumped, but when I turned to look, nothing. Just those open doorways, darker now, like mouths. Then I saw it again. A curtain in one of the houses, shifting. Not like wind was moving it, but like someone had brushed past it on the other side. I got out of my truck, walked halfway to that house, calling out, "I'm not here to cause trouble, just needed gas. If someone's there, please just let me know you're okay." Nothing. But as I stood there in the middle of that dirt road, I became aware of a sound. Not quite voices, not quite wind. Like whispering, but without words. Just the rhythm and cadence of whispered conversation, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I got back in my truck immediately, locked the doors, and started the engine. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to leave. Just drive. Worry about explanations later. But it was getting dark. The road out was rough, and I'd seen no other vehicles for hours. If I broke down or went off the road, I'd be completely stranded. Plus, and I know this sounds insane, but I felt like I needed to know. My whole life I'd been the person who reads the last page of a book first, who looks up movie spoilers before watching. I couldn't just drive away from this mystery. So I stayed, engine running, heater on low, watching those dark doorways as the last of the sunlight disappeared. That's when the whispering got louder. Still no words I could make out, but definitely louder, more insistent, like multiple conversations happening just outside the range of understanding. I turned on my high beams, sweeping them across the street, and for just a second, I swear, I saw shapes. Not people exactly, but suggestions of people, like the space where people should be was somehow visible, outlined in the way dust motes moved through the air. My phone had no signal. Hadn't since I'd turned off the main highway, but I tried calling 911 anyway. Nothing. The radio in my truck just gave me static on every station, even the emergency broadcast frequency. Around 10 p.m., the whispering changed. It became more organized. more like a conversation where different voices were taking turns, rising and falling in what almost sounded like questions and answers. I could feel it as much as hear it, vibrating through the metal of my truck, making my teeth ache. I grabbed my flashlight, one of those heavy mag lights that doubles as a weapon if needed, and stepped out again. The moment my feet hit the ground, the whispering stopped. Complete silence, even more absolute than before. I walked to the nearest house, pushed the door fully open with the flashlight, and stepped inside. The TV was still on, still muted, but now showing static. The crossword puzzle I'd seen earlier had been moved, still on the table but closed, the pen placed neatly on top. That's when I heard footsteps above me, on the second floor. Slow, deliberate, like someone trying not to make noise but failing. The ceiling creaked with each step, following a path from what must have been a bedroom toward the stairs. I stood at the bottom of those stairs, flashlight beam pointing up into the darkness, and called out one more time, "I know someone's up there. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just want to understand what's happening." The footsteps stopped directly at the top of the stairs. I could feel someone there, the weight of their presence, the held breath, the anticipation. But my flashlight beam showed nothing but an empty hallway, a runner carpet with a faded rose pattern, family photos on the walls. Then, and I'll remember this until the day I die, I heard my daughter's voice. Clear as day, coming from that empty hallway. "Mommy, why did you leave us?" But Claire was hundreds of miles away in Anchorage, safe with her father, and she'd never called me Mommy. It had always been Mom, or when she was really little, Mama. I ran, not walked, not backed away carefully. I ran like my life depended on it, crashed through that front door, stumbled to my truck, and peeled out of there so fast my tires threw gravel against the storefronts. In my rearview mirror, illuminated by my tail lights, I saw them. People, dozens of them, standing in the middle of the street where seconds before there had been nothing. They weren't moving, weren't waving, just standing there watching me leave. Men, women, children, all perfectly still, all perfectly normal looking except for the fact that they hadn't been there 10 seconds ago. I drove those 3 miles of gravel road faster than was safe, my truck fishtailing around corners, branches scraping against the sides. When I finally hit the main highway, I didn't stop until I reached the next town, nearly 50 miles away. I pulled into a 24-hour diner, my legs shaking so bad I could barely walk, and asked the waitress if she'd heard anything about Copper Falls, any emergency, any evacuation. She looked at me like I'd asked her about Atlantis. "Honey," she said, refilling my coffee cup for the 3rd time, "there's no place called Copper Falls around here. I've lived in this area 40 years. I drove back the next morning. I know that sounds crazy, but I had to. I found the spot where I'd turned off, or where I thought I had. But there was no road, no worn path, no wooden sign, nothing. Just unbroken forest, trees that looked like they'd been growing undisturbed for decades. I spent 3 hours walking through those woods with GPS, looking for any trace of that settlement. I found nothing. Not a foundation, not a power line, not even a clearing where buildings might have stood. When I got back to Anchorage, I checked every map, every record I could find. No Copper Falls, no record of it ever existing. The old-timer who'd first told me about it? The other truckers at that stop said he'd died 5 years before I claimed to have met him. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving those long, empty stretches, I hear that whispering again, just at the edge of my hearing. And I push the accelerator a little harder and don't look in my mirrors until I see city lights again. I'd been working a construction job back then, saving up for classes, and weekends were my escape. My friend Marcus had this old pickup, and he suggested we drive out to Big Lake for a couple of nights with a few others. There were 5 of us in total. Marcus, his cousin Drew, my coworker Lena, her friend Sarah, and me. We were all in our early 20s, restless and craving something different from the usual nights of cheap beer and crowded bars. The idea of camping near the lake sounded like freedom, and we packed light. Too light in hindsight. A couple of tents, sleeping bags, and a cooler stuffed with gas station food. The drive took longer than planned because Marcus insisted on shortcut trails that were more mud than road. By the time we got close to the lake, the sky was already bruised with fading light. Pines surrounded us in every direction, so thick it felt like we were threading a needle through endless green walls. When we finally stopped, the ground was uneven and damp, but Marcus grinned like he'd just discovered gold. We set up camp, laughing, swatting mosquitoes, arguing over who forgot extra matches. The place had this eerie silence between our voices, like the forest itself was holding its breath. On the second afternoon, while searching for dry wood, Drew spotted a path that looked barely walked. Curiosity got the better of us, and we followed it. The trail twisted deeper into the woods until we stumbled across a weathered hunting cabin, half swallowed by moss and shadow. The windows were cracked, the door hung crooked on its hinges, and the roof sagged as if it had given up years ago. Lena muttered that it looked like a set from a horror film, but Marcus was already pushing the door open. The hinges groaned loud enough to wake the dead. Inside, the air was thick, sour, and colder than outside. The first thing I noticed was a workbench cluttered with tools. They weren't rusty the way you'd expect in a place this neglected. Some were sharpened clean, others stained dark in ways I didn't want to admit were blood. A pile of hides lay in the corner, fox maybe or something larger, stacked like someone had left in the middle of a job. Lena whispered that it had to be poachers, and none of us laughed at her nervous tone. In the dust, there were boot prints fresh enough to smudge when Drew brushed his hand across them. That was the moment I felt a knot settle in my chest. Whoever had used this cabin hadn't abandoned it. We didn't linger long inside the cabin, but it was enough to sour the mood. On the way back to camp, none of us spoke much except Marcus, who kept brushing it off like it was just some old hunter's shed. But Sarah kept glancing behind us, and Drew muttered that the boot prints looked too fresh to ignore. By the time we reached our tents, the sun was bleeding into the horizon, the kind of light that makes everything sharp and unreal. I tried to shake the unease by focusing on building a bigger fire, but the silence between the trees felt heavier than before, like something waiting. When night came, the fire turned into our anchor. We sat close, the flames popping, shadows crawling across our faces. Marcus cracked open a cheap beer and tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but nobody laughed much. Lena leaned forward suddenly and asked if anyone else had noticed how quiet the woods had become. No crickets, no distant calls, nothing. Just the snap of our fire and our own breathing. Drew muttered that he didn't like it, and Sarah said she thought she'd seen a figure between the trees when we first lit the fire. She said it quickly, like if she said it slow it'd sound worse. At first we dismissed it, nerves, imagination, the kind of paranoia that grows in the dark. But then, as if on cue, I caught movement near the edge of the firelight. It wasn't clear, just a suggestion of someone standing too still, too tall, half swallowed by the forest. My chest tightened as I tried to focus, and Marcus stood up, yelling into the trees, asking who the hell was out there. No answer came, but the shape didn't move away. It just lingered, like it knew we could see the outline. Sarah gripped my sleeve hard enough to leave marks. Marcus grabbed a flashlight from his truck and swung the beam toward the tree line. For a second, the light cut through branches and revealed nothing but bark and shadow. But when he swept back, I swear I caught a glimpse of a boot, half hidden behind a trunk. The same tread pattern we'd seen in the cabin. My throat went dry. Drew cursed under his breath and said we should pack up right then, leave everything behind if we had to. The fire suddenly felt too small, the forest too large, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been using that cabin was watching us decide what to do. Marcus insisted we weren't leaving in the middle of the night, saying it was too risky to drive those muddy roads in the dark. That decision split the group. Sarah and Drew wanted to go immediately, while Lena and I were torn, glancing between the shrinking fire and the trees beyond. The figure had vanished, but that didn't make it better. Every rustle felt intentional, like someone circling us slowly, testing our nerves. I remember clutching a half-burnt log, not as a weapon that would do much, but just to keep my hands occupied. Hours dragged, and nobody slept. We kept the fire alive with anything we could find. Branches, even damp bark that smoked and stung our eyes. At one point, the sound of footsteps crunched leaves just beyond the light. Not animal, not random, human. Marcus aimed the flashlight again, and this time we caught a clear reflection from something metallic. It disappeared the moment the light hit it, like whoever held it jerked away. That was enough. Drew shouted that we had to leave, and no one argued anymore. We piled into the truck, tossing tents and coolers half-zipped, not caring what we left behind. The drive out was chaos, branches scraping the sides, mud spraying, Marcus swearing as the headlights flickered with every bump. At one point, Sarah screamed that she saw someone running alongside the tree line, keeping pace with us. I didn't look. I couldn't. The moment we hit the gravel road, Marcus gunned it, and we didn't stop until we were back in town, parked under a streetlight like it was the safest place in the world. The next day, we argued about what to do. Report it? Go back for our stuff? In the end, no one wanted to explain why we'd been snooping around a cabin that probably belonged to someone dangerous. Marcus eventually retrieved the truck again, but he didn't find the tents or cooler, only the charred remains of our fire, stomped out, and a set of boot prints circling where we'd been sitting. We never camped together again after that. Even now, years later, whenever I see a fire glowing in the distance, I can't shake the image of someone watching from the dark, waiting for the right moment to step closer.
This is something that happened back in the 1990s when I was a kid. I think I was about 10 years old, and I remember that one night I went to Toys R Us with my mom. Being a kid, I always loved going to Toys R Us. It was one of the most fun stores to go to as a kid in the 90s, but on this particular occasion, I wasn't getting anything. It was my younger cousin's birthday party that weekend, so we were going to get her a present. I don't remember why, but my mom left to go there at night. It was after dark, but I don't recall the exact time. Anyways, when she said she was going, I asked to go with because I always wanted to look at the video games there. It was in the winter time and very cold out, so I remember that I put on my big winter coat and then we left. So we arrived at Toys R Us, and I recall that the store was not very busy. After making it inside, my mom was going to look around for something for my cousin. I knew she would go over to the girls' toys, so I told her that I would catch up with her in a bit and I wanted to look at the video games. My mom said that was fine. Almost every store that we went to that sold video games, I would go over there. Like Target or Walmart, I would play the video games while my mom shopped. So I walked over to the video games section, which was on the left side of the store, and my mom went to the right. I got over there and started looking around. I was looking at the PlayStation and Nintendo 64 games. The store was still very quiet, and I started looking at what was over there. I remember that after being in the video game aisles for a few minutes, I heard someone approaching. I looked over to see another kid who appeared to be several years older than me, like maybe 13 or 14 years old. He saw me and then went into another aisle. I thought nothing of it. But then, about a minute or two later, he came back around the corner and approached me. He said hi and asked me what video games I was looking at. I told him, and I wasn't sure why he was talking to me, but I figured that he was just being friendly. We started talking about our favorite video games. I remember that he seemed really excited about the video games that they had for sale there. He was pointing out his favorite ones to me and was being really friendly. Then, after talking for like 2 or 3 minutes, he said that he was going to let me go, and then he walked away. I just kept looking around at video games for another few minutes, and then figured that I would go and find my mom. She might be done with her shopping soon. So I left the video game area and then wandered over to the girls' department where my mom would be. When I was walking over there, I turned to go down an aisle, and I saw the other kid who had talked to me just minutes before. He was looking in my direction, but was really far away. I sort of saw him out of the corner of my eye when I did, and then I just continued. I soon located my mom, who was finalizing which thing to get for my cousin. I went over and stood by her, waiting for her to finish shopping. A few minutes into that, and I soon saw that kid again walking by. He didn't seem to be at the store with anybody else. I found it a little bit odd that I kept seeing him, because he walked by again a few minutes later. Pretty soon my mom had finished her shopping. We headed up to the front of the store to check out. As we were checking out, I saw that kid yet again, now walking around past the checkouts. He kind of seemed to be just wandering the store. I didn't really think too much of it though, but I remember that he didn't seem to have anything with him either. After my mom finished checking out, we left the store. We were in the parking lot walking to the car when out of nowhere I heard someone approaching quickly right behind me. I turned around and looked back to see that same kid right there. He was literally right behind me, and I was really confused. He just seemed weird to me. He then stood there for a moment before saying that he saw I was leaving and just wanted to say bye. I was just like, okay, bye. I might have been a 10-year-old kid, but I knew that he was acting strange. Then he walked closer and grabbed at the hood of my coat. I also was wearing a winter hat, I remember. When he grabbed at my hood, I remember that I felt there was something in it, and then he put the hood over my head. When he did, I felt him take whatever was in my hood out of it. I had no idea what was going on. He then said, "It's cold out, I'm just helping him out," as he looked over at my mom. He then quickly moved away, except I saw that he now had a video game in his hand. It looked like a Nintendo 64 game. Then he started walking away really fast, and that's when I realized that the video game had been in the hood of my coat, and I had no idea. My mom and I watched as the kid now jogged out of the parking lot to a nearby sidewalk. I realized that he had used me to shoplift. When we were looking at the video games, he must have put the game in the hood of my coat without me noticing. Then I simply walked out of the store with it, and he had been keeping tabs on me. It was impossible to see the game inside my hood because my coat was so big. All he had to do was get it from me after I left and then run away. I told my mom this, and she went back inside the store with me and reported it. Then we left. I'm not sure what happened after that. I'm guessing they never caught the kid. It's still something crazy that I will remember from time to time. Sometimes I wonder if that kid went on to be a famous bank robber or something like that. I hope not, and I hope that he stopped stealing. One night back in the early 2000s, I was shopping at the local Toys R Us. I was looking for a gift for my son's birthday. This Toys R Us I had been to many times before. It was only a few miles from our house where my husband and son were. So I got to the store and started looking around. It was not hard to find stuff that my son liked at Toys R Us. I easily found 2 or 3 gifts for him pretty quick, and I was continuing to look around. During that time, I remember that I was in an aisle sort of in the middle of the store, but it was a smaller aisle. The store was also very quiet by now, with it being nighttime. Only a few other shoppers were scattered around here and there. So as I looked around in the aisle, I heard quiet footsteps and then looked over. When I did, I saw this man walk into the aisle that I was in. He was wearing this really creepy old man mask, the kind that goes over your entire head, and it looks super realistic. As soon as I saw it, it made me jump back because of how disturbing it looked. The guy entered the aisle and then just looked at me. I told him, "You scared me." He had no reaction at all. He just stood there. Then, after a few seconds, he just walked away out of the aisle. It was a really weird thing to see, and it made my skin crawl. I tried my best to just forget about the guy and continue with my shopping. After a few minutes, I mostly was able to. I was in another part of the store, and then I turned and went down this other aisle. It was one that went towards one of the back walls of the store near the corner. As soon as I turned into the aisle, I noticed the man again. He was standing with his back to the wall at the very end and facing me. He was just standing there, not moving, and staring in my direction, still wearing that creepy mask. This caused me to instantly turn around and walk away. I moved to another part of the store, and at that point, I honestly considered just leaving. But over the next few minutes, I didn't see the guy, and I was able to find some things in another part of the store. I would say that I stayed inside the Toys R Us for maybe 10 more minutes or so, and then I decided to leave. I went to the front and checked out. I got my son a few gifts, and then left the store and went to my car. However, when I got inside my car in the parking lot, before leaving, I surprisingly noticed that man again. There was another car parked in a different parking space across from me, but kind of far away. I'm not good with estimating distance, but it was probably like 100 feet away from me and a little to the left. There were not many cars out in the parking lot anymore, so that made it easier to spot him. Plus, his car was facing the direction of mine. It was a smaller car that was a sedan that he was in, and the man was sitting in the driver's seat still wearing the mask, which surprised me. It gave me a bad feeling, because he was just sitting there not really doing anything. I was hoping that he would leave. But then I decided to leave, because obviously I wanted to get out of there now. So I backed up my car and then went to drive off. Except as soon as I started moving forward, I noticed his car pulling out of the parking space. This instantly gave me a bad feeling. Of course I had thoughts that he was following me. He already had creeped me out multiple times that night. I didn't know who he really was or what kind of intentions he really had. I pulled up to the stop sign at the end of the parking lot, still seeing him driving through the lot now. I then merged onto the quiet road that went past the Toys R Us. Most roads were not very busy at this hour. After I started going down that road, I looked back to see what the man would do. He completely blew through the stop sign and turned into the direction that I was going. It wasn't more than 30 seconds later and he was right behind me. I thought that he must be following me now. When it came time for me to turn to another road, I took the turn and the guy behind me did as well. I was still driving home at this point, but knew that I couldn't continue going there with that masked man following me. I didn't want him to know where I lived. So after going down that road for a ways and realizing that the man was not going to give up, I took an exit. I then drove down that road and then crossed the highway and went back on it going the opposite direction. For some reason, my only thought was to head back to the Toys R Us. I'm not really sure why, but that's what it was. The creepy man following me also did all the turns that I did and was still behind me. So I drove down that road, took an exit, and then came up to the Toys R Us again. Soon I made the turn back into the parking lot. I would feel slightly safer in the store knowing that there were at least a few other people around. I parked in the closest available parking spot to the doors, and then the man drove a ways down and went to park not right next to me, but still pretty close by. I got out of my car and then quickly started walking for the door. I thought that the man might get out of his car too, but he did not. When I had made it almost to the entrance, surprisingly, I saw his car move from the parking space that he was in and start to drive away. When I got inside the store, I kept watching from just inside. He left the parking lot entirely. This made me feel better, but I still went over and reported him. I told an employee of Toys R Us what was going on, and then I left the store again. He was gone still. I got into my car and then very carefully drove home. Thankfully, the guy never showed up again. I was worried that he might show up at my house or something, but he did not. I'm not sure if he really had bad intentions or if he was just trying to scare people, but I think the fact that he followed me for so long when I was driving home is more than just trying to be scary. He probably figured that if I was reporting him to the Toys R Us, the cops might get called or a manager might come out. Either way, I'm glad that he left. I worked at a Toys R Us for a few years a long time ago back when they were open and popular. It was a cool job to have for the most part. I was a young adult, so it hadn't been that long ago since I had been a kid, and it was cool to be around all the toys and stuff. It was a lot more interesting than working in other stores in my opinion. While I worked there, I did a little bit of everything over the years. I started out as a cashier and then began doing more stocking shelves and things like that. Most of my coworkers and managers that I had were nice people and fun to be around. Some of my coworkers and I would joke around and stuff. Overall, it was a fun environment. But one night, it was actually pretty crazy and something happened that I will never forget. I remember that I was working a closing shift. We closed at 9 p.m., so I had worked since sometime in the afternoon that day. It was an average night in the store and not too busy and not totally quiet or anything either. So we closed at 9 o'clock, and by that time it was me and two other coworkers. One was the manager John, and the other was my coworker Kevin. After closing, we would stay after on average for 30 minutes or more, because we had to go around and clean the floors and make sure that the shelves and displays looked good, and John the manager had to do other stuff too. If things were crooked or out of place, we had to fix it and stuff like that. On this night, John the manager was doing work up at the front with numbers or whatever, and Kevin was cleaning. I was left to go around the store and make sure that everything was good. This is something that I actually liked doing. Usually there would be some stuff on the floor or out of place, but not too much. So I started going around the store after close on this night and reorganizing things. I remember that about 10 minutes in, I was in one of the aisles towards the back of the store. It was then that I heard footsteps not too far away from me, but thought nothing of it. There were 2 other people with me in the store after all, so it was probably one of them. As I continued with my work, I soon heard the sound of something being knocked over a little ways away. It was out of my sight, and I was a little curious as to why Kevin might be over there. Probably 5 minutes after that, I had now moved to a different spot. I heard footsteps again not far away. Then, not long after this, a random small stuffed animal came flying over the shelf of the aisle that I was in and nearly hit me. When this happened, I knew that it had to be Kevin, but it seemed strange. Kevin did joke around sometimes, but usually not to this degree. I instantly asked why he did that, and I took the stuffed animal and tossed it back over the shelf. There was no response, and I heard the animal hit the floor. But then I heard footsteps moving away. I had a sort of bad feeling, like maybe it wasn't Kevin, but I quickly told myself that that was not possible. We always made sure that nobody else was in the store before closing, so I continued working. When I was around on the other side of the store, I once again heard footsteps not too far away, but saw no one. Finally, I had finished what I was doing, and I went back over and located Kevin. When I did, I asked him if he was messing with me. He said no. He completely denied throwing the stuffed animal at me, or even going near me. He said that he had been cleaning the floors near the front the whole time, and I believed him. I told him that I thought someone else was in the store. It was possible, but seemed unlikely. We always announced multiple times on the store loudspeaker that we were closing, and then we would go around every aisle and make sure that it was empty before we locked the doors and stuff. So I didn't know how this was possible, but I knew that somebody else had been walking around the store with me. Kevin and I went up to the front and found the manager, John. We told him that we thought somebody else was in the store. John then went on the store loudspeaker. He announced that we were closed, and if anybody was inside, they would have to leave now. He said that it was not a big deal, but they had to leave or else it would be trespassing and the police would be called if they didn't. After this store-wide announcement, nothing happened. We didn't hear footsteps or anything. So we all decided to go around the store and look. This is when I was really freaked out. I didn't know who it could be, and it seemed like they were not wanting to be found. I looked around the store by myself as the 3 of us spread out to be more efficient. However, after looking around the entire store, we didn't find anyone. I didn't hear any footsteps or anything either. And after all reporting back to the front of the store, nobody had seen anything. Now I was really confused. There's no way that I was just hearing things. The stuffed animal being tossed at me confirmed that. And I didn't really think that Kevin would pull off that elaborate of a prank. John the manager certainly wouldn't either. John turned off the lights to the store at that point, and he said that we could call the police if we wanted, but there wasn't much else that we could do. It kind of seemed like John was a little bit skeptical of the whole thing at that moment. But then, after the lights turned off and after John spoke, we heard footsteps off in the distance. All 3 of us heard it. We knew that somebody was in there now. He had to have been hiding in just a really good spot. John then said, "That's it, I'm calling the cops." He then walked over to the phone to dial. Kevin actually ran towards the sound of the footsteps. Within seconds, the footsteps turned into the sound of running. I could not see, but could hear. Kevin was now running after. They seemed to go farther and farther to the back of the store. The next thing I knew, I heard a door opening, and not long after, I heard nothing more. Kevin came back like a minute later, winded. He said that the guy had left out the back door. So he had run to the back room, and then he found the back door and ran out of the store. The cops arrived a little while later. We all had to talk to them for a little while. Then I went home. I don't know what happened with the guy. I don't think the cops arrested him or anything. I don't even think they found him. But it was a really crazy thing. I wonder what that man's plans were by staying in the Toys R Us that long after close. This happened back in the spring of 1998 when I was 8 years old. It was a great Saturday. I remember I woke up, watched cartoons on the TV, and had breakfast. It was a sunny day, and I obviously didn't have to go to school. Saturday was always my favorite day of the week. I don't remember why, but my dad then took me to Toys R Us that morning. Now, I don't remember a whole lot from when we were in the store that morning. I just recall walking around the store and being in there for a little while, and I know that I got something, but I don't remember what. Other people were there, obviously, and we were at the store for maybe 20 minutes. We left and went back home, and I remember that later that day, my parents, brother, and I went to the park. It was this pretty large park that was in our neighborhood, less than a mile away probably. It was surrounded by roads on all 4 sides, but it was very large. We went to this one field that was sort of on the end, and we were the only ones there at that particular time in that area. As I was outside, not too long after being at the park, I remember noticing a woman there. She was in a car that had parked on the side of the road really far away, but it was parked parallel right next to the park. Some other cars had parked nearby as well, but at this car a woman got out and started standing right next to her car. I recognized her because I remembered that she had been inside the Toys R Us, so it was weird to see her here now as well. My parents did not notice, and I seemed to be the only one, and she was really far away. But a few minutes later, I saw that she was still there. She was just standing kind of next to her car and seemingly watching me. I mean, she was looking in my direction and not really doing anything else, but I didn't have that clear of a look at her because the park had various trees and benches and stuff. Plus, she was super far away. Every so often, I would look over and she would still be there. I had no idea what else she could be doing. My brother and I were really the only people in that particular area. There were a few other people in other places of the park, but she wasn't looking at them. Still, it was no reason to panic or anything. I didn't know why she was there, but overall it didn't seem like that big of a deal to me. More of just an interesting thing. We stayed at the park for probably like another hour. I remember that even when we were going to leave, the woman was still there, which was pretty strange. However, we had parked in the complete opposite end of the park, so when we got to our car and stuff, the woman was no longer in sight at all. After leaving the park, we drove back home. I remember that we got back and all went inside that afternoon. However, I noticed out a window that the woman had pulled up in her car. She was now parked on the side of the street not too far away from our house, and I happened to know that she did not live on our street. That was when I decided that it was really weird, so I told my parents about it at that point, who had not known. My dad said that he was going to go ask the woman what she was doing, so he left the house and started walking over to her. When he got about halfway there, she suddenly took off in her car, driving the rest of the way down the street. My dad came back inside and said that it was really suspicious. After that, I never saw her again. I'm not really sure what she was doing. I always wondered if she was going to try to kidnap me or something. I'm glad that I had the awareness to recognize that she was there. This is something really crazy that happened to me when I was a high school senior. I still don't have an explanation for it. It all started one random night. I was a senior in high school. Back then, I played a ton of video games. I really didn't have a whole lot of friends or do a whole lot of social stuff. Most of my nights, I would be in my bedroom gaming. I did have a best friend named Josh though, and we would hang out all the time, or at least game online together. We went to school together as well. I should mention that this was back in like 2008. So I remember that one night my mom had to work a night shift, which she occasionally did. Josh came over to my house, and it was just us there with my mom being at work. We were in my bedroom playing video games. Out of nowhere, at like 9 o'clock at night, there was a random knock at the front door. It freaked us both out, because why would anybody come to the door at this hour? We paused our video games and walked over to the living room. I remember looking out the window to see that nobody was there. Then we went over to the front door and opened it. I looked around outside, but whoever had knocked on the door was gone. It seemed suspicious. However, I considered that it might be somebody at the wrong house or something like that. But after opening the door, we realized that there was a sticky note left on the wall of the house right next to the door. It had not been there before, obviously. I picked it up and read it. The note said, "Toys R Us, tomorrow night, 11 p.m. It gave us the exact address underneath it. I had no idea what this meant, but I felt a little spooked by this strange note, and then we went inside. Josh and I talked about it, wondering what the significance of it could be. Was this left at the wrong house? Did whoever left us this note know us? Could it be someone from school? We didn't really know of anybody who would do this kind of a thing as a joke, though. Like I said, I didn't have a ton of friends, so nothing like this had ever happened before. Josh and I then debated showing up to see what would happen at the Toys R Us if we went there, but overall it just seemed too sketchy of a situation. We returned to playing video games until Josh had to leave to go home later that night. The next day after school, Josh and I were hanging out again. At night, we were at my house with my mom working late again, so it was basically the same setup as the previous night. As it started to get late, we remembered the note from the previous night. I guess we were both curious, and we talked about it for a while, and then decided to go. We both left the house and went out to Josh's car at about 10:30. The address of the Toys R Us that we were supposed to go to was one that was not that far away. It was one that I had been to as a child. However, the store had recently closed the previous year, and now it was just an abandoned building. But it still had the Toys R Us sign and stuff, so that was already weird to go to this abandoned place. And I'm not going to lie, I was pretty nervous. Josh drove us to the location and we arrived at probably 10:45, so we were a little bit early. When we got there, Josh backed into one of the spots on the far side of the parking lot. It was completely empty aside from us, and really dark too. There were a few high dim lights at each corner, but other than that, nothing. The large Toys R Us building was completely abandoned and empty. It was dark and completely silent in the parking lot. Josh and I debated leaving, but we decided not to. We were talking to each other, wondering who was going to show up. It felt like we were on a stakeout, and it was both exciting and fun, and also creepy and terrifying. I thought that probably nobody would show up at all. I figured that it was all some kind of a prank, or just somebody randomly messing with us. Or maybe it was a mistake, and whoever wrote the note had realized that and now was not coming. The property of the Toys R Us was also kind of secluded. There was a lot more businesses down the road, but in this one particular spot, it was sort of on the edge of the commercial area. This quiet sort of access road went towards the other stores, but past the Toys R Us, it just went down and connected with a busier road. There wasn't much of a reason to drive past here anymore with the Toys R Us being gone. So the road surrounding it was really quiet as well. And around the building of the Toys R Us store was a small grass area, some trees, and fences as well. It continued to approach 11 o'clock. We were talking to each other still and debating all the possible scenarios. We were joking around a little bit, but I was actually quite nervous. Then, finally, it was 11 o'clock. At first, there was nothing, but Josh didn't leave just yet. We continued talking, and I was starting to feel less nervous, thinking whoever had left the note was probably not showing up. It soon became 11:01, and then 11:02. Then, all of a sudden, we saw these headlights come down the road on the opposite end of the parking lot. It could just be a random car coming down the road, I thought. But then the car turned into the Toys R Us parking lot. There was no doubt in my mind that this was the person who had left us that note. It looked to be an older but larger SUV, like maybe a Chevy Suburban from the 90s. The vehicle drove very slowly in the parking lot and then parked in a space directly facing us, but still a long distance away. It was next to one of the old cart corrals from the Toys R Us. We were still parked there, not knowing what to do, and we didn't move. Then the car flashed its brights at us several times. It was weird. We could not tell who was driving or how many people were in the vehicle. It was far away, and the windows appeared tinted. We still didn't move. After it flashed its brights a few times, it stopped doing that and then just sat there. There was no way either Josh or I was going to get out of the car and see who that was or what they wanted. After us and them were just sitting there in the parking lot for like a minute, suddenly the other car moved. It started driving extremely fast right away. In fact, it screeched the tires as it left the spot, and it was driving straight for us. Josh didn't move the car. I think he was too shocked to. Within seconds, the car got right to us and then slammed on its brakes. It stopped literally in the spot right next to us. We both looked over. Even though the windows were tinted, we saw this guy in the driver's seat and another guy in the passenger seat. They were both wearing ski masks and sunglasses with them. When we saw that, it was really scary. Josh put the car into drive and began driving away to leave. He instantly turned and went for the exit of the parking lot. The SUV went after us though. It followed us in the parking lot, and then right when we were making the turn to leave, the SUV actually bumped us from behind. Josh kept going as the SUV followed extremely close. We left the parking lot and went down that quiet road. The SUV backed off slightly but continued to follow. Neither of us said a word as we were both too freaked out to speak. We drove down that road and then went down another one. This road was also completely empty aside from us. After driving down that road with the SUV following us for a short ways, it suddenly turned and went in another direction. We drove the rest of the way back home completely freaked out. Both of us were now talking to each other, wondering what on earth had just happened. Josh got back to my house, dropped me off, and then left to go back to his house. Thankfully, there was barely any damage to his car from the bump. I went back inside and was terrified that the SUV would show up at my house. Thankfully, it did not. I never saw it again or got any more strange notes on my front door. It's still something that I think about. Josh and I are still friends, and we bring it up from time to time. That was one of the craziest events of my life. Many years ago, I worked at a Toys R Us for a while. I was part-time and would mostly work on nights and weekends. This was way back in 2003, so many things from my time working there I have forgot. However, one memory sticks out as something that I will never forget. The Toys R Us store that I worked at was a little bit smaller, but it was the closest one to me. I remember that I had been working there for several months when this happened. We had a break room where I would take all my breaks in. Most nights when it was time for my break, I would be the only person in there. Sometimes if it was the weekend, or just randomly here and there, I would not be, and there would be other people in there with me. But typically I was. I would just hang out in there and watch the TV, or eat, or read. So one time, I was on my break in the break room, and there was suddenly a loud knocking on the break room door. I would always close it because we were supposed to. In the far back of the store, there was a hallway where the restrooms were. A little bit farther down that hallway and to the right was the break room. I figured it to be a coworker, but I didn't know why they were bothering me on my break. I got up and went over to the door and opened it, but nobody was there. It seemed like a weird thing, and I just went back with my break. There were no more knocks that time after that. I don't remember exactly when the next time it happened was, probably a few days later. But once again, I was in the break room by myself, and there was knocking on the door again. When I got up to look, whoever did it was gone. This time though, just minutes later after I had sat back down, they knocked again. Once more, they were nowhere to be found. And this happened again at least 2 more times over the next week or so. It wasn't every break I took, and it wasn't every time that I worked, but it was happening multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times at night. I was annoyed and wondering who was doing this to me and why. I asked several coworkers if they knew anything, but none of them did. However, after it happened once more, I got so fed up that I decided to take my next break in my car. So the next time that I worked, when it was time for my break, I left the store and was sitting out in my car in the parking lot. It was a night shift, and I remember that things were not too busy. I thought I was finally going to take a break with some peace. Sometime into it though, I sat in my car eating an apple, when suddenly I heard a loud noise behind me. Somebody started banging on the back passenger side door to my car. It was incredibly startling because I had not expected it at all. I turned around and looked to just barely see somebody running away and ducking behind the back of my car. I could not tell at all who it was, but now they were right behind my vehicle. So because of that, I decided to drive away. I put my car into drive and just left. As I was leaving, this gave the person no place to hide. When I looked behind me, I saw a man sprinting away and hide behind another nearby car. I couldn't see his face, but I could see that he had a basic build, and I could see what he was wearing. I just drove a short ways away, but then returned back to the Toys R Us to continue my shift. I went inside when my break was over and told my manager, but I figured that whoever had done it was long gone. Then I continued working my shift. Later on, when I was still working that night, only like 30 minutes after that, I saw someone. There was a man inside the store, and he was standing kind of far away, but he was wearing the same thing that the person who had knocked on my car was wearing. Could this be the guy? I kept looking at him. He started walking a little bit closer, and then he noticed me. He looked at me and then turned around and left the store. That seemed really suspicious to me, and it made me think that it was him. I hoped that he wouldn't come back, but he didn't stay away. It was probably my very next shift, and I took my break, this time in the break room again. I really didn't think the guy would return, but sometime into my break there was another loud knock at the door. Literally the instant I heard it, I jumped up and ran over to the door. I opened it and then ran into the back of the store. When I did, I saw the same guy. He was running away still. I continued after him and then yelled at him. He eventually stopped and acted confused. I yelled at him for a good minute, and then he turned and walked out of the store. After that, he never came back. I'm not sure why he was messing with me like that, but after I caught him red-handed, he seemed to stop. This is something that happened just last year, and it's still unexplainable to me. I live alone in a pretty typical apartment. I'm on the 3rd floor of a 5-story building that has lots of apartments in it. I've lived here for a few years now. On the night of this story, I was at home alone and just hanging out at my place. It was probably about 9 o'clock at night, and randomly I got a knock on my apartment door. I got up and then walked over to the door. I figured that it must be a neighbor at this hour, but I didn't know why they would be there. I had spoken to a few of my neighbors a few different times, but overall was not super close with any of them. When I got to the door, I looked out the peephole, but nobody was there. So then I opened the door and looked out. By now there was nobody in sight. However, on the floor right outside my door on the rug, there was a Toys R Us box. It was really weird because it was really old looking, like it was straight out of the 90s. It was basically a delivery box from Toys R Us, and it was kind of large too. I picked it up and took it inside, wondering what it was doing here at my front step. After bringing it in and examining it, I realized that it must be a mistake. However, after looking on the box, there was no address or name on it, no shipping indicators at all. It was like somebody had just took this and manually delivered it to me. I thought that it must be a mistake still, but out of curiosity I decided to open it. Inside was a bunch of toys, probably from Toys R Us. They were all vintage toys from the 90s, unopened in the packages. I closed the box back up and then kept it by my door. It was strange to me why somebody would deliver it so late and why it was even here. The next day, after I got back from work, I knocked on multiple doors of my neighbors. I went to my neighbor across the hallway, to my left, right, and the person who lived directly above me and the person who lived directly below me as well. I really wanted the rightful owner to get their box, but each person said it wasn't theirs. I asked them each if they had any idea who it would be, but nobody did. They all seemed just as confused as me, and I was beginning to feel like a crazy person for asking all my neighbors if they were expecting a Toys R Us box from the 90s. So I just kept it and didn't know what else to do. But that very same night, something else strange happened. It was once again fairly late, this time I think later than the previous night. There was a knock on my door. I got up and ran over to the door this time. Instead of looking through the peephole, I just opened the door. When I did, I saw a woman walking away. I called out to her, telling her that she had the wrong address. Instead of stopping and talking to me though, she just ran. She sprinted down the rest of the hallway about as fast as she could. Then she was quickly out of sight. I tried to chase after her, but she was really fast and got away. When I returned to my place, I picked up the package that she had left. It was literally the same thing as before, another Toys R Us box from the 90s. I opened it and there were more old toys in their unopened boxes. I was so confused, and I still am. There were no more packages left at my place after that, and I still have the boxes of old toys, and I'm not sure what to do with them. I still would like to know who that woman was who left them and why. This is a crazy situation that I was in many years ago. I was in college at the time and was young. Back then, most of my friends were good, but I had one kind of bad friend named May. She was honestly not that bad, but she put me in a few tough situations, like the one I'm about to talk about. I had known her since high school. We went way back, and May was usually nice, but unfortunately she got into drugs a little bit too much and hung out with some sketchy people. One night I got a text from her on my phone, asking if she could borrow some money from me. She claimed that it was for her rent and said that she just needed $200 in cash. She had borrowed from me once before and did pay me back, so I found her to be trustworthy. I told her okay, and then she asked if she could have it now. It was like 10 o'clock at night, and I didn't think it was that desperate of a situation. I asked her if it could wait, but she said no. I was annoyed, but I said okay and told her that I would go now. Then I remember she called me on the phone and confirmed that I could do it, and I said yes. She said she was not at home, but gave me an address and said to meet her there. When I got to the address, it was an old Toys R Us in town about 10 minutes away. I was confused because this Toys R Us was abandoned. I thought that maybe it had changed to a new business now. Perhaps she had got a job there. I really didn't know, but I was young and clueless. So I drove there and got to the parking lot, which was dark, and it was abandoned. My car was the only one in the entire place. There was no other business there, just the old Toys R Us, which was closed. I texted May asking where she was, saying that I was at the address she had given me, but it took me to an abandoned Toys R Us. She texted back saying that it was correct, and told me to walk around back and she was over there. By now I was feeling creeped out, and I felt like I should not have agreed to lend her the money, but I left my car and began walking. It was really dark, as the Toys R Us had been abandoned for probably several years. It was just a vacant building now, and the parking lot had weeds growing out of it. So I went around and behind the building, and there was this back alleyway. It was the old delivery spot where trucks would bring the products to the Toys R Us, and it was even darker back there. I didn't see May or anybody. As I walked back there, I pulled out my phone to call May and ask her what in the world was going on. But just then is when I heard a door open from just up ahead and to my right. I looked up and saw a man opening a back door to the Toys R Us. He waved me forward and told me to come inside. But when I got to the door, he said that he needed my phone. He was a big, kind of scary-looking guy, and I reluctantly gave it to him, but he said he would give it back to me. Then I went inside, still very confused. I was in this dark back room area, and then I saw this other guy as well as May. She asked for the money, and I gave it to her and asked why we were in the back of an abandoned Toys R Us. She didn't answer me. She then gave the money to the other guy, and they told us to leave, so we left. I got my phone back, and May said that she needed a ride back home. So I drove her home and asked her what that was all about. Well, she told me that she owed those guys money for drugs, and they wouldn't let her leave until she paid them. I guess she was in debt to them or something. I dropped her off and told her don't bother me with that kind of stuff again. Who knows what could have happened? She could have got us both killed or something. After that, I didn't talk to her for a while. But that's a night that I will certainly never forget. I used to work at a Toys R Us a long time ago, back when they had a decent amount of stores open. It was obviously a very popular place for people to buy toys, and we carried just about everything you could want. We also had a great selection of video games. In my time working at Toys R Us, I was a cashier. I only worked there for about 6 months. For the most part, it was a decent job, and most of the people there were nice. One day, I was working a really long shift. I started in the morning and got off in the late afternoon. I think it was a Saturday because we were pretty busy for the whole day, I remember. So not too long after we opened, this one guy came in and bought something. I don't remember what. But then I remember like an hour later I saw him again. He was tall, kind of skinny, had glasses and a slight beard, and I remember that he was wearing a hat. I said nothing about him checking out twice in the span of like an hour. But then he came into my checkout line once more, probably 20 minutes later. He was just buying one thing every time. This time I found it really odd that he was in my line again. We had about 5 checkouts open, so we could have gone elsewhere. And why did he keep coming back here anyways? So when I was scanning his items, I asked him why he was coming back here so much. He said, "What, am I not allowed to shop here?" He sounded all offended. I said something like, "No, I just saw you 2 times already, and that doesn't usually happen." He said nothing, but just glared at me, paid, and then left. I figured, well, I won't see him again. But wouldn't you know it, like 30 minutes later, there he was in my checkout line once more. This time, I didn't say anything, seeing as how I offended him so much the last time. I just scanned his items, told him the cost, and then sent him on his way. But he came back again like an hour after that. It was the weirdest thing ever. And he kept buying stuff too. I really had no explanation or thought as to why this guy kept coming back to Toys R Us. And again later that day, he came back again. And the rest of my time working, he came back about 3 or 4 more times, and always in my checkout, which was the one on the end. Eventually, I was off for the day and glad to be leaving. I found the whole thing to be really weird. After I clocked out and was leaving the store, I saw the guy in the store. He was walking towards the checkout that I had just left, and now another coworker was at it. I just turned and walked away, and could not believe that the guy was back yet again. So the next day I showed up to work, and my boss told me that I missed a crazy night the previous night. She told me that the same guy who kept coming to my checkout all day continued to do so. Even after I left, he kept going back to the same check lane, now with a new employee. He continued to do this all the way until close. And when the store closed, he was the last person in the store, and they told him to leave. He finally checked out and left, and then about 30 minutes later, when my coworkers were about to leave, he came back again. He started banging on the doors, and they told him that Toys R Us was closed, but he insisted that he needed to get in and buy something. They would not let him in, and the man tried to run past them into the store. He refused to leave the property, and they called the cops, who finally got the guy to leave. Thankfully, he didn't show up again the next day. I never saw him again. I'm not sure why he kept going back all those times. It was really weird. One time back in the late 1990s, I went shopping at a Toys R Us. I was like 20 years old, but my older sister had a son who was like 5 at the time. I would babysit him a lot, as I was his only aunt, and my sister and her husband had to work a lot, and they were pretty busy. One time, I took my nephew to the Toys R Us, as it was his favorite store for obvious reasons. Toys R Us had been a fun place for me as a kid as well. We were there and we were shopping around the store, but I was only planning to get my nephew 1 or 2 things. But of course, he wanted to get everything. So we were in the store for quite a while. At one point, this Toys R Us employee came up to me and asked if I needed help with anything. I told him no thanks, but he continued to stay around me and show me some products and stuff for a few minutes. As he was doing this though, he started asking me questions about myself and things like that. I told him thanks for the help eventually, and I remember that he just came off kind of weird and creepy. He did eventually leave though. However, when we were in another part of the store, he came back up to me again. I don't remember all the things that he was saying, but I just remember that he asked me where I lived and stuff. The way that he was talking and his overall personality just gave me red flags. I was not rude, but I made it kind of clear that I was not really wanting to talk to him anymore. He did not take to this. I told him that I had to get going, and it was at that point that he asked me if I wanted to do something when he got off of work. I told him no thanks, I could not. He walked away at that point, and I thought that I would not see him again. I wanted to leave the store, but getting my nephew to go instantly like that was a hard challenge. He wanted to look at everything and got distracted easily. We slowly made our way up to the checkouts. Before we got there though, the same employee came up to me again. I literally could not believe that he was back once more. He told me that he was getting off of work right then and asked where I was going. I said, if you're getting off of work now, then I think I'm going to keep shopping. The guy then said that he would wait outside for me. This really creeped me out. I watched the guy walk away and leave. The store was still pretty busy at this point. My nephew and I waited in line for a bit to check out. When we got to the front of the line, I reported the creepy employee to the person at the register, noting how he said he was going to wait outside for me. She said I should tell a manager and then called one up. When I told the manager about the guy, he said that nobody matching that description worked there. We both walked outside. That's when we saw the same guy standing around on the sidewalk out front. The manager asked the guy what he was doing wearing a Toys R Us uniform. The creepy guy just took off running. He didn't really work there. I was glad that he was gone now though. We left after that and went back home. But I always found it creepy that the guy was going around pretending to be a Toys R Us employee, and then he was actually waiting outside for me. What could have happened had I not told the manager? This is something that happened recently, although I never told anyone close to me about it at all. Everything that happened made me curious on others' opinion of the situation and what they would do in my place. I'm a female, 18. For more information about my story, I work at a casino as a slot attendant. Recognizing anyone who seemed suspicious wasn't hard for me at all, considering I was the one who always handled the complaints, and it was as regular as ever. Me and my coworkers were always allowed to freely use our phones as long as it wasn't busy and we weren't assisting anyone. So taking that as an advantage, I used to always post on my stories. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I shared everything about my life for years. This included posting stories during work, selfies with my coworkers I was close with, or even when I would be out at the bus stop waiting for my bus to arrive and head home. It was the usual thing that I posted as I loved the night view. Just like everyone, I was pretty active on Instagram. So whenever my Instagram account's profile views would appear at a high number, it wasn't anything out of the ordinary or surprising for me. Neither were story views from accounts of people that I didn't know, considering I commented on a lot of posts and reels as everyone else. I would always enjoy viewing the accounts of the people that viewed my story. However, for over a whole week straight I would say, as I didn't fully keep track when I noticed this, there was this one account that was not following me and hadn't liked any comments that I made. But now somehow it was always, and I mean always, the first person to view my new stories. I felt somewhat disturbed by it, and I usually don't get bothered by these things, but something about it told me it was odd, so I obviously blocked the account to ease my anxiety and concern. I proceeded to continue on as normal. However, just the very next night after a normal day of work, I was waiting for the bus to head home and it was past 8 p.m. I was scrolling on Instagram waiting and noticed a new notification. As I checked it, it said that a new account started following me. Yet again, I got a bad feeling. The username was absolute gibberish, as if whoever this was spammed their keyboard. I didn't do much about it and just left it as it was. However, around past 1:30 a.m.-ish, I was still up as I always had trouble sleeping and tonight wasn't any different. So I passed the time by talking to my online friends on Instagram, and I noticed that I had a DM request as it changed to a 1, indicating somebody was trying to message me. As I checked it, I felt uneasy. It was the same account. I clicked on the DM, and it wasn't hello or anything. It was just follow for follow. It went on to say, I'm starting new. I wanted to make some girl mutuals, LMAO, sorry if this comes off weird. I thought nothing bad of it. I brushed it off, and thinking since it was a new person on Instagram, they were simply trying to make friends or get followers. However, even after thinking it was nothing bad, I still had a bad feeling about it. It was a heavy feeling. I tried to ignore it, thinking nothing of it, and I followed the person back, and that was it. Nothing happened. Now keep in mind that Instagram had that new feature where you were able to add your live location on Instagram Notes. And the very next day at work, as usual when waiting to clock out, I was texting my friend just telling her how I was heading out soon and I would text her as soon as I reached home. Clicking off the DMs, I noticed that the odd account had a new note up. It was the location being on and it was at the place that I worked at. That's when I felt my heart drop. I felt suffocated as I just stared at it, immediately clicking on it to check when it was added. It said that it had been added a minute ago. I live in a country where English speakers weren't much common, so not only was this odd, the fact that somebody was currently there, but right at this moment really freaked me out. I tried not to show much fear, so whoever this was didn't notice my anxious look and think of me as an easy target. I knew it wasn't any of my coworkers. I didn't see why it could be any of them. I placed my phone back in my pocket, looking at the few customers who were getting ready to leave since it was closing hours. I was pretending like nothing happened and was just waiting for closing. In reality, I was trying to catch someone who had their phone out to put that note up. However, nobody had their phones out, and it made me wonder again if the person was even here anymore. My mind was filled with all these puzzling questions. I went on as always, saying goodbye to my coworkers. There wasn't anything weird about them which led me to believe that it was one of them. As I did leave, I was headed to the bus stop. As soon as I was sitting down, I glanced through the corner of my eye to stay alert, but not to give myself away. I was texting my friend again about the whole situation because I was seriously freaked out, and that's when I noticed the note was gone. At that moment, I wanted to run home and sprint out of there, because I was quick to realize whoever this was already knew that I saw the note. I blocked the account immediately, and after a few more minutes, which felt like hours, I was drowning in my thoughts and sweating over the anxiety rising in me. The bus arrived, and I thankfully made it home okay. I stayed up as usual texting my friend, trying to get the whole incident off my mind, and I thought I would ask my coworkers tomorrow about it. I tried to keep it off my mind for now, considering that it was almost 3 a.m. I went ahead and took a shower to try to calm my nerves. I needed to go to sleep to be productive at work tomorrow. Heading out of the bathroom though, turning on the lights in my bedroom, I was checking my phone before sleep just to text my friends goodnight, and I noticed I had a new DM request. Yet again, a new account. I felt so uneasy and was seriously going insane trying to think of how to stop this. But the timing of the message was what scared me the most. I clicked on the message, and the message said that it had just been sent a minute ago. I didn't slide to check what time exactly it was sent at because I already knew. Whoever this was had already followed me home to see my light turn on. Even though my curtains were closed, it was obvious enough from the outside to see that a room light was on. The message was just a period, a dot, and the profile was lit green, indicating that I was on their close friends story and that they had posted something. They obviously wanted me to view their story. I hesitated to click it because I was anxious, and in that moment I realized that my hands were shaking. As I did view the story, there were 2 slides posted at about the same time that I received the DM. The first slide was a picture of me at the bus stop taken from behind. I was alone, and I didn't notice anybody around me at that time. The second story was taken from a car's window perspective, and it was the moment that I knew my prediction was right. I knew that this person had followed me home. Considering the second slide was taken inside a car, watching me, waiting for me, there wasn't any other reason that they would post such a thing. I built up the courage to DM the account. I was shaking like crazy and mainly frustrated, thinking that somebody was now toying with me, or at least that's what I hoped for deep inside. I sent a bunch of question marks and asked who this was. I told them to answer me before I reported them for stalking. I was left on scene for a few seconds, but I didn't wait. I tried video calling but was declined, and then they started typing. As the message was sent, I was told to follow for follow. I knew this was the same person as the one I had blocked before, indicating they wanted me to see their live location from notes again. So I did, and they had a note from 4 minutes ago. It was a laughing emoji, and their location was my street's name. I was frightened, and it took me a few seconds to move an inch. That's when the account asked me if I was lonely and needed company, with a smiling and shocked emoji. The realization dawned on me. This person thought I lived alone. In reality, I didn't. I lived with my mom. I already knew if I lived alone, I could possibly be harmed, considering the time it would take for the cops to get there, and I would have nobody else with me. I didn't give myself any time to process anything else or calm down. I immediately ran to my mom's room and woke her up. She got up and immediately sat up, seeing my panicked expression and harsh wake-up call. I didn't give her time to speak and just told her to call the cops and that somebody was outside of our house. She headed to the front door, making sure that it was locked and that the windows were locked. As I followed her, my mom was already on the phone with the cops. They sent out officers to our location and said to stay put. As about 3 minutes passed by, I had a small idea. I texted the account saying to come and test me. This was meant to bait whoever was texting me so that they wouldn't run away from the cops, and I wanted them to get arrested. However, I noticed it said Instagram user now, which meant I was blocked. So whoever this was might have seen my mom and realized that I wasn't someone who lived alone. As soon as the cops arrived, I wasn't fully relieved as the person was not found. They searched the house and questioned me, and I spoke on everything I knew. Over further investigation, nothing was found about who these accounts belonged to, and through my workplace security cameras, no suspicious activity was found and no cameras were available near the bus station. This situation stuck with me. Whoever this was, to this day, I still don't know. How they were able to know where I worked at if it was someone from Instagram who randomly found my page, I have no idea. It doesn't make sense to me. However, ever since this situation, I've stopped taking the bus and only order Ubers, and I wait inside until they arrive. I'm glad in the end we were safe, and I'm thankful that nothing else happened like that and hope that it stays that way. This is something that happened a couple of years ago, but has stuck with me, and I still remember it from time to time. It's something involving Instagram, which is obviously a very popular app and is one that I use regularly. At the time of this story, I would go on Instagram just about every day. Most of my friends and I followed each other and had for years. We would like and comment on each other's posts and things like that. We would also post stories almost every day. Every now and again there would be bots or weird people on Instagram, but it didn't happen too often. And when it did, you would typically just ignore them or maybe block them at most. Everything was usually harmless. They would maybe leave a weird comment or try to follow you, but overall nothing that strange had happened. One time though, I remember that I saw an Instagram notification that I had a message request. It said it was from my same name. This confused me, and I opened the app to see what was going on. You see, I don't have a very common name. It's not like super unusual or anything, but it's not very common. When I went in the Instagram app, I saw that this account had my exact same first and last name, and the profile picture was the same profile picture that I had. They were requesting to message me. The only difference between this account and mine were the amount of followers and people they were following, and obviously the username as well, because two people are not allowed to have the same exact username. It was a very similar name to mine though, but just off by an underscore or period or something like that. Anyways, I accepted the message because I was curious as to who this was. The person simply said, "Hi." I clicked on their profile and it had no posts, was only following a few people, and just had a few followers. None of them were people who I knew or recognized. I responded asking who this was. They responded pretty quickly back to me saying, "I'm you." Now, this was an unusual behavior for a bot, and at this point it seemed more likely to be a prank, but I didn't really know anybody who would do something like this. I asked, "What do you mean?" They simply said again, "I'm you." I was fed up and I closed Instagram and then got off my phone. I thought to myself, that's enough internet for today. However, hours later when I used my phone again, I saw that there were multiple Instagram messages now. They were all from that same account. The account just kept saying "hi" over and over again. A few times it said things like "answer me" or "respond now." I finally went back on and responded saying, "What do you want?" Soon after, the account simply sent me a link. I didn't know what it was, but I was hesitant to click it. Sometimes links can be viruses or scams of some sort. I did not know what this could be, because the link was just a bunch of random letters and numbers it seemed. However, my curiosity ended up getting the better of me and I clicked on the link. It took me to this archaic looking web page. It looked like those websites from the 90s that don't have much design and use Times New Roman font. But this web page was all white and had several headings of text and small paragraphs after them. Then there were photos, and the web page appeared to be all about me. There were pictures of me, mostly taken from my social media, but some were taken from other places, such as my friends' pages or even when I was in a school newspaper. It was like a biography of me. It said my name, date of birth, my parents, siblings, and where I was from. It said every school that I went to as well. It was almost like a Wikipedia page, but more archaic looking and less organized. And I'm not famous or anything, so this was really weird. When I saw it, I was totally creeped out. Whoever made this really took a lot of time to put it together. I left the website and sent another message to the person demanding to know what this was all about. But this time, they didn't answer. A short time later, I went back on Instagram, Except now, surprisingly, the person had blocked me. I was now so confused. I tried to find the account again, but could not. After that, there were no more strange messages or anything like that. I never saw that account again, and I never found out who was doing that. This is something that happened a few years back. So, it all started one night when I went on Instagram. For some background, I was a young woman at the time of this story, and I was pretty active on Instagram. I posted here and there and would post stories as well, and my account was public, meaning that anyone could see it and you did not have to be following me. When I went on, I saw this guy commented on literally almost all my photos saying, "You're beautiful." And while this might be a nice compliment, it was from a man who I had no clue who he was. When I clicked on his profile, we had 0 mutual followers, and he appeared much, much older than me. I just ignored it. I didn't want him on my page, but I didn't care enough to block him at that point. For the most part, it seemed harmless. He had also followed me. However, I did not follow him back or anything. He started to message me shortly after that. To start, he simply said hi and asked how I was doing. You might think this is rude, but I just ignored him. But the man was not having it. He started spamming me with messages. I didn't even bother to respond. I blocked him right there. I had blocked creeps a few times before, and I thought that would be the end of it. But as you could guess, it was not. The next night, I was at home in my apartment by myself as I lived alone. So really late at night, at like 11 o'clock, there was a knocking on my door. I thought that it was probably a neighbor of mine, because who else would go to someone's door that late? Without even looking to see who it was, I got up and walked over to the door. I opened it and saw a man standing there. I didn't realize that it was him right away. I still thought that this guy was a neighbor who lived in the building, but what he wanted I did not know. After I had opened the door, not all the way but just a few feet, he spoke. He first said hi, but without even letting me respond, he then asked why I didn't respond to him and why I had blocked him. At first, I was really confused and thought that he was at the wrong place, but then I quickly remembered and also recognized him. I mean, I had only seen his picture once for like a minute or two the previous night, so it was easy for me to forget, and he was really the last person who I had expected to show up at my door. As soon as I realized who he was, without saying anything, I quickly tried to close the door. As I went to slam it shut, the man reached out and tried to stop me. I was just barely able to get the door closed with him pushing against it. As soon as it shut, I locked it. Instantly, the man tried opening it, and when he could not, he started banging on the door. I was shocked. How on earth did this guy know where I lived? I was under the impression that he was some random guy, probably in another state. I figured that he was halfway across the country looking at my profile. The man continued to bang at the door and demand that I open it. I yelled back that I was calling the cops. The man just kept trying to get in and demanding for me to open the door. He started to kick at the door as well. I did not hesitate and I called the police. I reported the man and then went into my bedroom and closed the door and locked it too. This was just in case the guy was somehow able to break the door down. The police response was really fast. It was probably less than 5 minutes later. At this time, the man was still at my door trying to enter. The cops found him doing that and they arrested him. I later found out that he did not live in my building, but over an hour away. He had driven all this way to confront me after I blocked him on Instagram. It's one of the craziest things that's ever happened. I live by myself in a sort of small house currently that I rent. I've lived here for a couple of years. About 6 months ago was the scariest thing that's happened since I've been here. My neighborhood is pretty typical. There are a lot of other houses on the street. It's in a place where there are a lot of neighbors, but the street is typically pretty quiet, especially at night. I haven't seen many crazy things around the neighborhood at all. Rarely is there ever police activity or anything sketchy seeming going on. So one night, I was by myself at home. I was in my living room hanging out and had been for a while. My windows in the living room look out to the front yard and also to the street. So the windows were mostly covered by the shades, but not entirely. I had like a couple of feet maybe on one end. I got up for whatever reason, maybe to get something to drink or to use the restroom, I don't remember. But as I passed by the uncovered spot of the window, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. When I looked, it appeared as though a man was standing a few feet into my front yard. He was slowly walking, and I also noticed that he was wearing this really creepy-looking mask. It was a latex mask, the kind that are realistic and go entirely over your head. But this one I could tell was a mask right away, but it was still pretty crazy. I'm not sure who the mask was supposed to be of, or if it was just like a generic man or something. But it was a male's face, and it was definitely a scary sight to see out the window. When I saw him, he kind of kept walking forward, and then I'm not sure if he noticed me or what, because after that he turned and walked off into the street. He had looked over in my general direction, but not right at me, and I obviously couldn't tell exactly where he was looking. After he walked off, he disappeared down the street, and then I closed the shades entirely. I hoped that this guy would not return. I checked out the windows again before going to bed, and things were fine. To be honest, I really didn't know what that was all about, but I figured that he was just passing by. Maybe he was trying to pull a prank on someone else. I really don't know. He had only gone like 10 feet into my yard at most, and never really got that close to my house or anything. But literally right before I was about to go to sleep that night, I went on my phone. I saw that I had a new follow request on Instagram. When I looked to see who it was, the profile name was Jonathan Jones, which is obviously a fake name, but the profile picture was of a guy wearing that exact same mask. I looked at the account, following 0 people and 0 followers, 0 posts as well. It had just been made, and this was the same guy who was in my yard. Something was really fishy here. I declined his follow request and looked out the windows one more time. They were good. Then I went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I saw that he had requested to follow me again. This time, out of curiosity, I messaged him. I said something like, "Who are you?" He did not respond though. And then I went on with my day. I didn't accept or decline the request at that point. That night, I went back on to look. He had still not answered me, but had seen the message, and he withdrew his follow request. I was now very confused, but I was also really creeped out. So much so that one of my best friends came over to stay the night on my couch so that I wouldn't be alone. We looked out the windows every so often. Then, at one point, maybe 10 o'clock at night, my friend yelled that she saw him. I got up and ran over to the window. It was covered, but she was carefully looking out of the bottom corner of it, pulling back the blinds. I looked too, and saw the same man casually walking down the street. He got to my house and looked over, and we both ducked down. Moments later, we looked again. The man walked up the driveway and seemed to notice my friend's car there. He stopped and was just looking at it for like 10 seconds straight. Then he turned and looked to the window. I'm sure that he saw us. We both ducked down again really fast. I was terrified. When we looked again though, he was walking off and disappearing down the street. We thought about calling the cops, but did not. He did not return again that night, at least not that we're aware of. And after that, I'm not aware of him ever coming back. He never requested to follow me again, and he never messaged me on Instagram or anything after. I still don't know who he was. He clearly knew who I was though. It's something that really creeps me out when I look back on it. Something really crazy happened a few weeks ago. I thought that I would share because I still don't understand it. So one night I was just at home by myself, relaxing and scrolling on Instagram Reels. In case anybody doesn't know, these are just short videos that you can quickly scroll through posted on Instagram. At one point, I don't even know how long in, I came across this rather creepy one. It was an Instagram reel of this guy in a fairly dark room which I assumed was his bedroom. He was staring at the camera with these sort of wide eyes and had really messed up hair. I assumed that it had to be a joke and he was trying to be creepy on purpose. The guy, in a creepy voice, put his head really close to the phone and began talking. He was saying stuff that made him sound like a creep or a stalker. He was kind of rambling on and not making a ton of sense, but every now and then he would say things like, "I like to watch you sleep," or "I love to follow people home." I was convinced that this was a character that the guy was pretending to play. I've seen some pretty crazy acting people on social media. Some people will do anything to get views or followers, but something about this guy gave me the creeps rather than made me laugh. So I clicked on his profile out of curiosity. He had a decent number of posts, it looked like, maybe 20 or 30, and they were all very similar to this. However, he did not have that many followers. I think he had under 100 followers, and I don't recall how many people he was following. Most of his videos were just him rambling as if he was talking to someone and saying creepy things. Sometimes he would smile at the camera with wide eyes for the entire video for like 10 or 20 seconds. It was really strange. So eventually, after scrolling through his page for like 5 minutes, I got out of there and moved on. I started watching more reels. When I was still on Instagram and still watching the reels, I got a notification of a new follower. I clicked and saw that it was the same guy who I had just seen. He had followed me on Instagram. I was creeped out when I saw that. I hadn't liked any of his posts and I didn't follow him or anything. This seemed like a really crazy coincidence. Then, less than a minute later, he messaged me. I remember he said, "What are you doing right now?" I was not sure how to respond, so at first I did not. Then, about 10 minutes later, I saw that I had been tagged in a video by this guy. I clicked on it, and it was another one of his rambles, except this time, he appeared to mostly be talking about me. He said my name several times, and then started talking about how he was going to try to find out where I lived and things like that. At one point, he said that I had better not make him mad. After his creepy rambling video, I instantly blocked him and then got off Instagram. I felt sort of paranoid that he would somehow figure out where I lived or something like that, but thankfully nothing else happened. I still wonder, how did he even find my profile? I'm hoping that I never see that guy again. Maybe it was just a harmless joke where he pretends to be creepy as a character. I'm hoping that's what it was, but I don't know. I'm glad I blocked him though. Several years ago, I got a new job. It was a step up from my old one. I will spare you the boring details of the job, but basically I work in an office and in marketing. This new job was a bit of a step up from my old one. I would be doing the same thing, but in a better position. I also thought that the company was better, and I made more money, so it was a good career move. My first day working at my new job, things went well. However, I wanted to stay after to help myself be able to get acclimated better with everything. So I ended up staying back and being the last person there that night. It's some things that I probably could have done at home, but I preferred to just stay back and do it at the office. By 6 o'clock at night, the office was pretty much completely empty aside from me. However, I stayed until almost 9. For the last few hours that I was there, most of the lights were off and it was completely quiet. I stayed busy and focused on what I was doing. So much so that after hearing a noise on the other side of the office, I completely ignored it. It didn't even click until a couple of minutes later when I heard it again, that why would I be hearing a noise? I was the only person there, so nobody else should obviously be in the office with me. Our office is not too big, but decent sized. It's just a one-story building, but the space is divided pretty well with cubicles and a few different rooms and larger offices. I had an actual office, but my door was open, and so I could see out to the cubicle space, or at least most of it, but the noises were still out of my view. I stopped what I was doing and listened. At that point, I didn't hear anything for a little while, so I went back to work, planning to now finish up very soon. I had a sort of creeped out feeling, but that was not a surprise with me being the only person in a dark office at night. As I was finishing, I did not hear any more sounds. I figured that I would look around the office before leaving though. When I was finally done, I left my office. As soon as I stepped out, I heard the sound of somebody walking a ways away. I did not know who it would be. I walked forward, now feeling nervous. Then I looked up ahead, and to the right I saw movement. I asked, "Who's there?" Then I saw a man wearing a dark coat turn around. He looked surprised to see me. He said, "Who are you? I didn't know you were here." I asked him what he was doing here. He said that he worked there, and he was just working really late. I asked him his name, and he told me a name, but I didn't even know everyone there yet, and I don't remember what he said. It was my first day on the job. This particular office probably had at least 30 employees, and I had met most of them, but not him. I told him that I was also working late. He then told me that he was going to head out now, and I told him that I was as well. We walked out of the building together, but when we got to the parking lot behind the building, my car was the only one there. I asked him where his car was, and he said he had walked. This was also strange. Then he turned and started walking the opposite way really fast. At that point, I just left. The next morning, I found out that several files had been stolen from the office. I got questioned about it, seeing as I was the last one there. I told them what happened, and I found out that the guy in the office from the previous night did not work there. At least not anymore. He actually had in the past, but had been fired. I don't think he knew I was in there that night. Somehow he had snuck in, and I'm not sure how, but he stayed after close and was sneaking around. I had no clue, but it all makes a lot more sense now. In 2022, I started work as an overnight custodian in a high school. This was my first and last day on the job. I had gone to a training session at the school with someone else prior to this, so I knew what to do for the job and things like that. I got the job already during the school year because I heard the previous person had quit. I was not bothered by having to work overnights, and I thought that it wasn't that big of a deal. But I would be the only person in the entire school for most of the time when I was there. This also did not bother me. I felt ready for the job. I thought that it would be easy being all by myself in this large building and simply doing the tasks that I had to do. There wasn't a whole lot of thinking involved. It was pretty much just doing work. I would clean floors in the hallway, bathrooms, and some other common areas. All the classrooms would be locked as they pretty much belonged to their teachers. The school was pretty average for a high school, maybe slightly on the smaller size, but there were still many hallways and places to keep me busy cleaning for the overnight hours. So my first day there, I arrived, and I was with another night custodian for a while before he left. Now, by this point, all the lights in the school were off except for a few. Some of them were motion activated, so they would turn off automatically, and then when you walked back near where they would turn on again. So I was working that night by myself, and probably an hour in, I heard footsteps down a hallway not too far away from me. Right away I thought someone was there, but it made no sense, because the school was obviously closed, and nobody was supposed to be there. I called out, "Is anybody there?" but did not get a response. I walked over to where I had heard the noise. I really was not that scared, more so just annoyed, but when I went around the corner, there was no one there. I kept walking around, however, there were multiple places the person could have gone. I went back to what I was doing. The footsteps I had heard had not been that close to me. To be honest, I started to wonder if I had imagined it. I remember that a while later, I went to this one hallway at this far end of the school. Walking over there, multiple lights turned on as they were motion activated like I mentioned before. But when I got to that far hallway, the lights were already on, which was weird. It made me wonder if I did hear someone in the school and if they had walked in this hallway. When I was over there working, I didn't hear anything at first, but maybe 10 minutes later, heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps in another nearby hallway. I stopped again and listened to try to figure out where exactly this was coming from. It sounded to be sort of far away. I began walking over there. As soon as I did, I heard this really creepy sounding man's laughter. It made me stop in my tracks. And then I heard the footsteps seem to turn around and start walking closer. Suddenly, I just wanted to get out of there. But whoever it was did not go down my hallway, but instead went someplace else. By now, I knew that somebody else was in the school. I wasn't sure whether to call the police or what. It was my first day, and I didn't want to have to call the cops on the first day of work. I chose to walk after where I had heard the footsteps going. I started yelling that I was going to call the cops if they didn't leave. My hope was that I would scare the person off. Why would they be in the school like this? I had no idea. But now they had gotten away, and I had no idea where this person was. I spent a good 10 or 20 minutes walking and jogging down random hallways looking for this guy. A few times I was sure that I heard footsteps a ways away, but I was never close enough to see him. Finally, I went back to where I had been before, where my mop and cleaning supplies were. When I got there, I saw that they had been messed up. My mop was knocked over and my cleaning cart was also knocked on the ground. I knew the guy had done it. He seemed to be messing with me now. I continued trying to work, now feeling paranoid. I moved to another location after a while. I was in this spot when I was sort of out in an open area, and out of nowhere behind me, like 20 feet behind me, I heard the man's creepy laugh again. It was one of the creepiest moments of my life. I turned around and just barely saw someone move around the corner. I was so creeped out. For the rest of my shift, I just stayed by the front of the school. I didn't hear anything else though. I made up my mind that I was going to quit, and I admitted to myself that I wasn't cut out for the job. When another custodian arrived in the early morning, I told him what happened. The entire school got searched, but the man was gone. I never saw him, and I'm not sure why he was messing with me like that. I'm glad that I quit though. Back when I was like 17, I got a part-time job at Walmart as a cashier. This was many years ago now. So I remember at this particular Walmart, the first day of work, I had orientation and training. I watched a video in a room I remember, and then after that, I got trained for like another hour. Then I got to actually work as a cashier, but I was actively being trained on the job by someone. This was my first ever job, so I was nervous and didn't know exactly what to do right away. The people were nice though, from the manager to the woman training me. Things had gone pretty well, and when it was time to actually start working as a cashier that day, I felt more confident. For the entire time that I would be working that day, the woman would stand next to me and watch me. She even took her break at the same time as me, as for that day it was her job to train me. Her name was Linda, and she was fairly young herself, but was older than me, and I remember that she said she had been working there for over a year. She seemed confident in the job, so she was a good person to learn from, and she was pretty nice to me. So I remember that I was kind of slow, but overall doing a good job. Linda would watch me as I scanned customers' items, and then she would stop me if I screwed anything up and correct it. It was also nighttime on a night where it was quiet and not too busy, so that helped as well. I was getting the hang of things, but I remember that I was scanning items for a customer, and Linda started looking back over her shoulder. She wasn't really watching what I was doing. I didn't really care that much though, and I didn't pay too much attention as I was busy enough and focused on doing my job. She returned her focus soon enough, but several minutes later I noticed her looking over again. At one point I stopped and looked over, but saw nothing strange. The store just seemed average. The direction that I looked was over past the checkouts towards the main walkway right before you would check out of the store. One of the times when she kept looking over and kind of behind her, she said something like, "Oh no." I remember I asked her what, and she just said that she wasn't talking to me and I didn't do anything wrong. I kept working with Linda there supervising me. Then, a while later, out of nowhere, after I had finished helping a customer check out and there was no one else in my line for the moment, Linda turned off the light. This indicated that the lane was now closed. She then told me to follow her. I didn't think that it was break time, but I was obviously going to listen to her. She started walking really fast through the store. She headed for the clothing department and then was going like through the middle of the racks of clothes. I was really confused, but being a young kid on her first day on the job, I followed. She walked all the way to the back part of the store. Then she entered the back room area for employees only. I'd never been in this particular back area because I primarily was just a cashier. As strange as the whole thing was, I thought that Linda was maybe going to show me around there. But then, she walked through there and then went to the exit doors that led to outside. She then opened the door, and it was a back alleyway for deliveries, I guess, but it was much quieter back there. Linda then just walked out. I started to follow her, but she said, "You don't have to follow me anymore." So I stopped at the doorway. Then I watched Linda jog through the pavement and climb up this retaining wall and then go into the grass past some bushes. She was then out of my sight. I had no idea where she had gone. I stayed there for like 5 minutes waiting, but she never returned. So then I just went back in the Walmart and went up to the check lanes again. I found my manager because I was confused as to what I was supposed to do. I told him that Linda left, and he asked why, and I said I didn't know. He looked confused, and then told me that I could be done for the day and said I could leave. So I clocked out, called my mom, told her I was done, and then got picked up later and left. After that, I continued to work at the Walmart, but I never saw Linda again. Sometime later, maybe a couple of weeks, I asked someone what happened to her. I was told that nobody knew. She had simply stopped showing up to work. It kind of gave me the creeps. It was really weird how she suddenly just ran off. She seemed a little paranoid, and that made me wonder if someone was after her or if she thought someone was after her. She really didn't seem like somebody who would do drugs, but I guess that's possible too. Either way, it made for a very memorable first day of work, and I hope that Linda is okay. I had a bit of drama at one of my jobs once. Basically, my coworker started stalking me. I worked in an office building, and this guy was newly hired and a total creep. To spare you the long backstory, he asked me out once, in literally his first week of work there, and I said no because I was seeing someone at the time. This guy apparently asked out multiple other women around the office as well. But anyways, for some reason he seemed most interested in me. He added me on several forms of social media, and then used them to inappropriately message me. At first, I did not report it, but around the office, even though he worked not that close to me but in another room, we would still see each other around. He confronted me for not responding to him online, and it was kind of an ugly scene. After that, he ended up showing up at my house. I didn't answer the door, and he didn't break in or anything, but it was still pretty crazy, and at that point, I reported him. He ended up getting fired for it. I'm surprised that he even got the job in the first place, because all my other coworkers were super nice. Anyways, not long after this, I ended up moving to another office. It was the same company, but a different place of work. I started work here one day and was excited about the fresh start. The office was closer to my house also, and overall was nicer. I remember that on the first day of work, things got off to a good start. The people were nice, my office was comfortable and I liked it, and overall the day was going by well. That was until out of nowhere I looked up and saw the same guy who had stalked me before. I had no idea what he was doing here. I also had no clue how he knew that I had changed offices. When I saw him, he saw me and started walking over. I didn't know how he had even gotten up here because we were on the 10th floor of a tall building. He walked right up to me and said hi as if nothing had ever happened. I asked him what he was doing here. He said that he wanted to see me, and I told him how he was not supposed to be here and I could call security. He said that I had gotten him fired, and I said, no, you got yourself fired. I told him to leave now and never come back, and I won't call security on you now, but if I have to call security, you'll be in big trouble. He looked surprised and then angry, and then said something like, okay, fine. Then he walked away. I watched where he went, and he seemed to head over to the stairwell. I was glad that he was gone, but this was also very concerning that he now knew where I worked again and stuff. So I continued on with work that day, and overall it went pretty well. By the end of the day, I had mostly forgot about the whole ordeal with the guy. However, after I got off work, I left and was heading to my car. It was in a private parking garage that we had, and the level that I parked on was only for our office. When I approached my car, I saw the guy standing there. Now this I could not believe. He was still continuing to stalk me, even at my new job. I regretted not calling security on him earlier. When I saw him, I turned and started going back for the office. He started to walk after me, so I ran the rest of the way. He tried to chase after me, but I was able to make it back inside okay, and that particular door locked. I then went and found a security officer and told him about the guy. By the time we got back to the parking garage though, the man had left. However, that night he showed up at my house. It was pretty late, like maybe 9 o'clock, and he started banging on my door. By this point, I wasn't having it, and I called the cops immediately. The man escalated things though. He started trying to open the door and then began banging on it hard. He then went around back and started banging on a window as well as trying the back door. Thank goodness the cops got there when they did. When they arrived, the man was attempting to break a back window and he was arrested. Since then, I haven't seen him. I still can't believe it all happened. Many years ago, I got a job as a waitress at the small restaurant. It was basically like a diner because we would be open for 24 hours and I had to start out working overnight shifts. I had worked an overnight job in the past, so it was not a huge adjustment for my routine, and this was the only job that I could find at that particular time. So on my very first night working, things started out pretty well. It was very quiet, but we did get a few customers here and there. I was the only waitress to work on the overnight hours because of it typically being quiet then. Our restaurant was located kind of out in the country and not really near anything else other than a gas station, but there was a very large highway real close by. I served a few customers and things went smooth. I had some experience as a waitress, which helped. Then I remember at almost 2 o'clock in the morning, this one man entered. He sat down in the corner and was alone. He was a large man and had a beard and wore a trucker hat. I went up and introduced myself and asked what he wanted to drink like I always did. He got a coffee and then later ordered food. The guy seemed pretty average to me, like many of the overnight customers that we had. Sort of quiet, but overall nice. Nothing was weird about it until the end. When it came time for the check, he told me that he had forgot his wallet in his car and he was sorry. He seemed genuinely sorry about it and like it was a mistake, and I didn't think he was lying. The guy said that he would go get it real fast. I remember he even said that he could leave his hat and shoes to prove that he was coming back. But then he stopped himself and said that I could come out with him to show that he wasn't lying. I told him, no, it's okay, I believe you. Go ahead and get your wallet. But the man insisted. He said, no, I want you to come with me and see that I'm not a liar. Then he added, don't worry, I'll give you a nice tip for the trouble. He grabbed the check and then kind of took my hand and led me to the door. In that moment, he was being really friendly, so I decided that I would go outside to his car with him to make it easier. That way he could just pay me there and then not have to walk back in the restaurant. So I followed the guy outside. Now, outside the restaurant was not well lit at all with it being out in the country, and the parking lot was mainly out front, but then it wrapped around the side of the building and went around back a little bit as well. The parking lot would actually be full during the dinner hours, but now it was almost completely empty. For some reason though, the man had not parked out front, but instead he parked behind the building. I followed him around to the back part where it was even darker. I saw his pickup truck. When we approached it, he suddenly grabbed my arm and began pulling me to the car. I asked him what he was doing, and he told me to be quiet. I tried to pull away from him, but he was much stronger and pulled me faster to his truck. I started to yell, but then he covered my mouth. There was nothing that I could do to overpower him. We were struggling, but overall he was getting me closer and closer to his truck. He got to the point where he was able to open the door. Just then, I heard something a ways back. The back door to the restaurant opened, and I saw our cook. Now, I don't know if he heard me yell or if he just happened to be going out back, but when he saw what was going on, he started yelling at the guy and came running over. This gave the guy basically no choice but to let me go. He quickly got into his truck and then drove away. The cook came up and asked if I was all right, and I was. He then called the cops. Unfortunately, we did not get the guy's license plate or really any information about him other than his description, and he left without paying too. I don't know if he was ever caught, but I'm really hoping that he was.